It was supposed to be just another typical day for Elon Musk. Meetings with engineers, calls with space agencies, brainstorming over Tesla's latest innovations, and a quick glance at the latest SpaceX mission report. But little did he know, this ordinary day would turn into one of the most extraordinary encounters of his life. Elon walked into the sleek, minimalist conference room at his company's headquarters. His usual confident stride faltered when he saw the room wasn't filled with adults as expected. Instead, sitting across the table was a child, a 5-year-old boy with wide, curious eyes, dressed in a simple t-shirt and jeans. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon paused for a moment, taken aback. This was a meeting he wasn't prepared for. "Mr. Musk," said a calm voice, and Elon turned to see the boy's father standing by the door. "This is Julian, my son. He's different. I think you'll want to hear what he has to say." Elon wasn't sure what to expect, but he was intrigued. He'd met many brilliant people in his career, from rocket scientists to AI experts, but a child? A 5-year-old child? That was new. Julian looked up at Elon with a steady gaze, far more mature than most kids his age. He didn't seem nervous, not in the least. In fact, his eyes sparkled with curiosity, as if he already knew exactly who Elon Musk was, as if he had something important to share. "Hi, Mr. Musk," Julian said, his voice calm but firm. "I've been reading about your Mars mission. You're planning to send people there, right? But I have a question. How do you plan to generate enough power when you're so far from the sun?" Elon's eyebrows shot up. Was this kid serious? A 5-year-old asking about power generation in space? Well, we're working on solar energy and some other technologies for that," Elon replied, trying to sound composed, though he was honestly taken aback. "But it's still a work in progress." Julian nodded thoughtfully, his small hands folded in his lap. "That's good, but solar power won't be reliable enough once you're far past Mars. You should be thinking about nuclear fusion, not just solar panels. It's more sustainable." Elon froze. Julian was right. He had considered nuclear fusion in the long-term future, but this child, was talking about it with the kind of certainty that most seasoned engineers would only dream of. A stunned silence filled the room. Elon couldn't remember the last time someone had left him speechless, especially not a child. He looked around the room to see if anyone else was as shocked as he was. His assistant, standing in the corner, seemed equally stunned. Julian's parents looked on with nervous smiles, as if they had been expecting this moment for a long time. How did you know about that?" Elon asked, almost as if he were trying to confirm whether he had just heard what he thought he had. Julian's gaze never wavered. "I've been reading about fusion energy for about a year now. I'm pretty good at understanding things quickly." Elon leaned back in his chair, trying to process the information. A 5-year-old who not only understood nuclear fusion, but also had the ability to grasp the implications of it for space travel. This was beyond extraordinary. It felt like the universe had just dropped a message in his lap, when he wasn't entirely sure how to decode. "Okay, Julian," Elon said, after a long pause. "Tell me, what else do you think I should be focusing on?" Julian's eyes lit up with excitement, as if this were the exact moment he had been waiting for. He shifted in his seat and began speaking with an eloquence that would have surprised anyone, except perhaps Elon, who was starting to suspect there was something much bigger going on here than he had ever expected. "You need to focus on expanding humanity's potential. The Earth won't last forever. You already know that. But the real challenge isn't getting to Mars. It's what comes after. How do we evolve as a species to adapt to life on other planets?" Julian said, his voice clear and confident. "And you need to stop thinking about Mars as just a backup for Earth. Mars is just the first step. The next step is the entire solar system. You need to think beyond just one planet." Elon's mind was racing now. Was this child some kind of prodigy? Was he just exceptionally gifted? Or was there something deeper going on? The conversation continued for over an hour, with Julian diving into topics that were far beyond his years. From quantum computing to artificial intelligence, space colonization to sustainable energy sources, it was as though Elon was talking to an adult who had already achieved everything he himself had been working toward. But Julian wasn't an adult. He was just a child. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon's thoughts were swirling. He'd met geniuses before, but this felt different. Julian wasn't just smart, he was ahead of his time. A 5-year-old with an IQ higher than Einstein's. A child who could see into the future with such clarity that it made Elon wonder if he was the one who needed to catch up. Elon had always prided himself on thinking big, on pushing the limits of what was possible. But here he was, listening to a child whose ideas were challenging everything he had believed about the future. And for the first time in a long while, Elon felt something he wasn't used to: humility. Elon left the meeting room with his mind buzzing. The conversation with Julian had shaken him to his core in ways he couldn't fully articulate. A 5-year-old child talking about nuclear fusion, space colonization, and the future of humanity with such precision? It was a level of brilliance Elon had never encountered before, and yet it was clear. Julian wasn't just another gifted kid. There was something extraordinary about him, something Elon needed to understand. As Elon sat in his office, trying to digest the overwhelming details of the meeting, he couldn't help but feel compelled to know more about Julian's background. Who was this child? How did someone so young develop an intellect that could rival the greatest minds of our time? Curious, Elon reached out to Julian's parents. Within hours, he received a private invitation to visit their home in a quiet suburb just outside of Palo Alto. It wasn't unusual for Elon to receive invitations from people in the tech world, but this one felt different. The curiosity gnawing at him was personal. He needed answers. The following day, Elon arrived at the elegant but modest home of Julian's family. The house was tucked away in a lush neighborhood, away from the bustle of Silicon Valley. It seemed fitting for a family that, despite being at the center of something world-changing, valued privacy and tranquility. Julian's mother, Clara, greeted him at the door with a warm smile. She looked every bit like someone who might raise an extraordinary child, poised, calm, but with an undeniable intensity in her eyes. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Musk," she said. "Julian's been looking forward to meeting you again. He's quite fond of your work, though I'm not sure he understands the full extent of it just yet." Clara's voice carried a certain pride, but also a touch of concern. Elon chuckled softly. "It's my pleasure. I don't think I'll ever fully understand Julian, but I'd like to learn more about him. I'm curious to know what's behind the brilliance I saw earlier." Clara's expression softened. "I think Julian would prefer to tell you himself." Elon followed Clara into the living room, where Julian was sitting cross-legged on the floor, flipping through a stack of books. The sight of him, so engrossed in his reading, reminded Elon of his own childhood, a time when he, too, would lose himself in books for hours. But the difference was that Julian's books weren't the usual children's fare. No picture books or cartoons. Instead, the boy was reading scientific journals, complex math equations, and theoretical physics. "Julian," Clara called gently. Julian looked up, his eyes locking with Elon's. There was no hesitation in his gaze, no uncertainty. He stood up and walked over to Elon as if they were equals, extending a small hand. "Hello, Mr. Musk," he said, his voice steady and formal. "I've read a lot about you. You're doing important work." Elon was struck once again by the maturity in the boy's voice. He shook Julian's hand, momentarily at a loss for words. I've read about you too, Julian. You've certainly made an impression," Elon said, sitting down across from him. Clara sat nearby, her expression neutral but attentive. Elon glanced at her, sensing that there was more to Julian's story than met the eye. "Tell me, Julian," Elon began cautiously, "how did you start learning about all these things? Fusion energy, space travel, quantum physics? I have to admit, I'm fascinated. You're not like most children." Julian smiled, but it was the kind of smile that made Elon feel like he was talking to someone much older, someone who had lived a lifetime's worth of experiences. "I was born curious," Julian replied simply. "I don't remember a time when I didn't want to know how things worked. My parents noticed early on that I wasn't like the other kids. By the time I was 2, I could read, really read, not just the simple words. I started with books about the stars, about how things work in the universe. Elon leaned forward, intrigued. This sounded like something out of a science fiction novel, but it was unfolding right in front of him. And by the time I was 3, Julian continued, I was building simple machines and asking questions that no one could answer. My parents took me to see specialists, and that's when they realized I wasn't just advanced for my age. I was different. Clara's face shifted slightly, a faint shadow of concern crossing her features. Elon could tell that there was more to the story, but Julian wasn't finished yet. I've always had a deep understanding of things, Julian went on. But the more I learn, the more I realize how much there still is to know. That's why I focus on the big things. I want to help solve the problems that matter. I want to make sure humans are ready for the next phase of existence, beyond Earth. Elon could feel the weight of Julian's words settling in the room. It wasn't arrogance that Julian conveyed. It was a quiet confidence, a purpose that seemed so clear in his young mind. But why fusion energy? Why space exploration? Elon asked. You could choose any field. Why those? Julian's eyes gleamed as he explained, his words flowing effortlessly. Because they're the key to humanity's survival. You're looking at Mars, but Mars is just the first step. The real challenge is creating a future where humanity can live and thrive across the solar system and eventually the galaxy. But you can't do that unless you solve the energy problem. Solar power alone won't cut it. You need something sustainable, something like fusion. Elon found himself nodding. It was as if Julian had unlocked a part of his brain that he hadn't even realized was dormant. The way the child spoke about the future was both overwhelming and inspiring. I understand now why you're doing what you're doing, Mr. Musk, Julian said, his voice softening. But it's not just about technology. It's about humanity. If we don't evolve in the right way, we won't be ready for what's next. Elon leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. Here was a child, no, a prodigy, who understood not just the mechanics of the universe but the very essence of what it meant to be human. And that was something no textbook could teach. I think we have a lot to talk about, Julian, Elon said, a smile creeping onto his face. And I think you might be the one who's teaching me something today. As the days passed, Elon couldn't stop thinking about Julian. He found himself replaying their conversation over and over in his head, dissecting every word, every idea, and every vision Julian had shared. The more he thought about it, the more Elon realized just how much he was struggling to keep up with this child's grasp of the future. Elon had always prided himself on thinking big, on tackling the impossible, but this felt different. Julian wasn't just thinking about sending people to Mars. He was thinking about the long-term survival of humanity. He was thinking about energy solutions, planetary colonization, and the future of the human race on a scale Elon had never considered before. The young boy's insights were a wake-up call, but they also left Elon with a gnawing sense of inadequacy. He sat in his office late one night, staring out at the sprawling city of Palo Alto, his mind churning with ideas and doubts. He'd always been a pioneer, a risk-taker, but Julian's ideas seemed to push the boundaries of what Elon thought was even possible. And the more he thought about it, the more he began to question himself. He had set out to make humanity a multiplanetary species, to ensure that life could continue beyond Earth. But was he doing enough? Was his vision too narrow, focused on the short-term goals of reaching Mars, while neglecting the deeper issues that Julian had brought up? Elon's thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. He turned to see his assistant, Sarah, standing in the doorway, holding a stack of papers. Mr. Musk, there's someone here to see you, she said, hesitating slightly. It's about Julian. Elon raised an eyebrow. Julian? Sarah nodded. His parents are here. They said they need to talk to you. Elon felt a surge of curiosity. What could Julian's parents want to discuss now? He had already met with them, and things had gone well. But the sense of urgency in Sarah's tone told him this was more than a casual visit. Send them in, Elon said, standing up from his desk. His pulse quickened as he prepared himself for whatever news was coming. Julian's parents, Clara and Michael, entered the room, their faces marked with a mix of concern and determination. Clara's eyes were locked onto Elon's, as though she were trying to read his thoughts. Michael stood behind her, his expression calm but serious. Mr. Musk, Thank you for seeing us, Clara began. We didn't want to alarm you, but we need your help. Elon motioned for them to sit. His curiosity piqued. Of course. What's going on? Michael sat down first, his gaze never leaving Elon. It's Julian, he said, his voice steady but filled with tension. He's not well. Elon's brow furrowed. Not well? What do you mean? Clara took a deep breath before continuing. Julian's abilities are evolving. He's been pushing himself harder, trying to process more and more information, and it's starting to affect him physically. We've taken him to doctors, but they don't know what's happening. He's experiencing severe headaches, dizziness, and sometimes blackouts. Elon felt a jolt of fear run through him. Julian wasn't just a child prodigy. He was something much more. This child, who had already surpassed the intellectual capabilities of most adults, was now facing a crisis of his own making. But why? Why is this happening? Elon asked, his voice tense. Is there anything we can do? Clara looked down, her voice shaky. That's the problem. We don't know. He's been pushing himself to understand things that aren't even supposed to be possible at his age. We've tried to get him to slow down, but he's insistent. He says he has to keep going, that he has to find the answers before it's too late. Michael looked up at Elon, his expression full of uncertainty. We don't know if it's just his mind, or if there's something more going on. But the truth is, Mr. Musk, Julian's ideas aren't just theoretical anymore. They're real. And we're afraid he might be trying to unlock something that even he isn't ready for. Elon sat back in his chair, feeling a rush of conflicting emotions. Fear, wonder, guilt. He had seen Julian's brilliance firsthand, but now he was starting to understand the cost of it. This wasn't just about helping a child with extraordinary intelligence. It was about a young mind trying to bear the weight of the future of humanity. What does he think is happening to him? Elon asked quietly. Clara's eyes filled with tears as she spoke. He thinks he's on the verge of a breakthrough. He says he's close to understanding the key to faster-than-light travel, to creating the energy source that will power entire civilizations. He's convinced that if he can just push a little harder, he'll unlock it. Michael clenched his fists, frustration evident in his voice. But we don't know if he's getting too close to something dangerous, something that could hurt him, or worse. Elon's mind raced. He had always been driven by a sense of purpose, by the idea that the future of humanity depended on the work he was doing. But now, faced with the reality of Julian's suffering, Elon realized that this wasn't just about ambition anymore. It was about responsibility. We need to slow him down, Elon said, his voice firm. I'll help. We'll figure this out together. But Julian needs to understand that he can't keep pushing himself like this. There are things we don't fully understand. Things that could have unintended consequences. Clara nodded, wiping her eyes. Thank you, Mr. Musk. We didn't know where else to turn. You've always been at the forefront of technology, and we hoped you'd have some insight. Elon stood up, determination flooding his veins. I won't let this go any further. Julian is a gift, but he's still a child. I'll make sure he gets the help he needs. As Julian's parents left, Elon stood still for a moment, absorbing the weight of the situation. He had just witnessed a young mind so far ahead of its time that it was literally tearing itself apart. Julian's brilliance was a double-edged sword. It had the potential to change the world, but it could also destroy him if he wasn't careful. Elon felt a sense of urgency deep in his gut. He had always believed that humanity's future rested on his shoulders, but now he understood that perhaps the true key to the future didn't lie with him. It lay with Julian, and it was his job to protect that future, no matter the cost. After Julian's parents left, Elon remained in his office, deep in thought. The magnitude of the situation weighed heavily on him. He had faced countless challenges before, from launching rockets into space to developing electric cars that could change the world. But nothing compared to the challenge of guiding this brilliant child, Julian, whose mind was far beyond anything Elon had ever imagined. The night was quiet, but Elon's mind was anything but. As he looked out at the city skyline from his office window, he knew there was no turning back now. Julian's potential was not something to be ignored. It was something that could alter the very course of human history. But it was clear that the path forward would not be easy. The next morning, Elon drove to the medical center where Julian had been referred for a series of tests. It was a state-of-the-art facility, one known for its cutting-edge work with brain function and neurological disorders, though no one could yet understand what was happening to Julian. As Elon entered the building, he felt a sense of urgency he had rarely felt before. Time was running out, and Julian's condition was worsening. The waiting room was quiet, and Clara and Michael were already there, looking anxious but hopeful. When Elon entered, they both stood and greeted him with a mixture of gratitude and concern. "Mr. Musk, thank you for coming," Clara said, her voice filled with both appreciation and worry. Elon nodded. "Of course. I know this is a lot for you both to deal with, but I'm here now. We'll figure this out." Michael looked at Elon with a pleading expression. "I don't know what else we can do. We've seen specialists from all over, but they're all baffled. Some say Julian's brain is simply too advanced for his body to handle. Others think he's on the brink of something huge, but it's coming at a price." Elon could feel the weight of their words. He had always understood that pushing the boundaries of human achievement often came with risks. But this was something different. Julian's potential for groundbreaking discoveries was unmatched, but now that brilliance was threatening to tear him apart. Before Elon could respond, a nurse came out to call them in. Julian had already undergone several tests, and it was time for the results. As they entered the sterile, white examination room, Elon couldn't help but feel like he was entering a new frontier, a place where the usual rules didn't apply. There, lying on the hospital bed, was Julian. His normally vibrant eyes looked dim, his small body frail and fragile. The boy, who had once spoken with such confidence and energy, now seemed exhausted, as if the weight of the world was crushing him. Elon approached him gently. "Hey, Julian," Elon said softly. "How are you feeling?" Julian blinked slowly, his voice weak but clear. "I'm okay, just tired. But I'm close, Mr. Musk. I know I'm close. I can feel it. The answer, it's right there." Elon's heart sank. Julian's condition was deteriorating, and yet, he remained fixated on his mission to solve the universe's deepest mysteries. The determination in the child's eyes was both inspiring and tragic. "Julian, I know you're trying to do something incredible," Elon said, kneeling beside the bed. "But you have to slow down. Your body needs time to catch up with your mind. Pushing yourself like this, it's too much." Julian looked at him with an intensity that took Elon by surprise. "Mr. Musk, I have to do this. If I don't, the future will never happen. You said it yourself. Humanity's future is on the line. You need me. We need me." Elon felt a knot tighten in his chest. He had said those words, yes, but he hadn't truly understood what they meant until now. He had always focused on technological progress, on achieving the impossible, but Julian was right. Without the right foundation, it could all fall apart. "I know," Elon said, his voice trembling with a mix of empathy and frustration. "But not at the cost of your health, Julian. Not at the cost of you." There was a long silence as Julian stared at him, searching for some answer in Elon's face. Then, finally, he spoke again, his voice softer but resolute. "I don't want to die, Mr. Musk, but I don't want to wait. I don't want to watch humanity fall behind. I have to push harder. I have to do this, for all of us." Elon felt the gravity of Julian's words weigh on him. How could he argue with a child who was so determined, so focused on something bigger than himself? Yet, at the same time, how could he allow this child to destroy himself in pursuit of that very dream? Before Elon could respond, a doctor entered the room with Julian's test results. The man, dressed in a white lab coat, was visibly concerned. "We've done everything we can to stabilize him," the doctor said, looking between Julian, his parents, and Elon. "But the scans show something we weren't expecting. It's not just his physical state that's compromised. His brain activity is off the charts. His mind is firing at a level that we've never seen in a human being. It's like his brain is trying to process information from the future, things we can't even comprehend yet." Elon looked at Julian, his heart heavy with worry. "Is that what's causing this? The strain on his body?" The doctor nodded gravely. "Yes, The energy he's expending to understand concepts that are light years ahead of his time is literally burning him out. The human body was never designed for this kind of mental overload. Julian's eyes were wide with excitement. But I'm so close, Doctor. Just a little more, and I'll figure it out. I'll find the way to make everything work. I'll fix the energy problem, the space problem, all of it. The doctor shook his head, a mix of awe and concern in his eyes. You are close, Julian, but you need rest. Your mind needs to catch up with your body. Elon's thoughts raced. This wasn't just a scientific breakthrough anymore. This was a matter of survival, not only for Julian but for the future of humanity. The answers Julian sought could change everything, but only if they could figure out how to channel that brilliance without destroying him in the process. We'll figure this out, Elon said, standing up and turning toward Julian's parents. I won't let you face this alone, but we need to slow things down, just enough for you to heal. Then, together, we'll work through this. We'll make sure you can achieve your potential without losing yourself in the process. As Elon turned back to Julian, he saw the faintest glimmer of hope in the child's eyes. Julian wasn't giving up, and neither would he. But the journey ahead was more uncertain than ever. If Julian's mind was truly on the verge of unlocking the secrets of the universe, Elon had to ensure he was ready, not just to witness that breakthrough, but to protect the future it could create. The days that followed were a blur of meetings, doctors, and sleepless nights. Elon found himself torn between his commitment to the future of humanity and his duty to protect Julian. The young boy, so full of potential and brilliance, was teetering on the edge of something no one could quite understand, and Elon couldn't shake the feeling that if he didn't act quickly, Julian might slip away. Not physically, but mentally and emotionally. The medical team had placed Julian in a controlled environment, monitoring his brain activity and attempting to slow down the overload of information. But despite their best efforts, Julian remained insistent. He wouldn't stop. His desire to reach the answers that eluded him was consuming him, pushing him further into a state of exhaustion. Elon couldn't help but feel guilty. He had always believed in pushing the limits of what was possible, but this was something different. Julian was pushing beyond the edge of human capability. Elon couldn't help but wonder, had he, in some way, encouraged this relentless pursuit? Had his own work, his own ambition, contributed to this child's desperate drive to solve problems no one should have to face alone? One evening, after another tense day of trying to persuade Julian to take a break, Elon found himself sitting in the quiet of his office, looking out over the city. He was alone, as usual, but tonight, the solitude felt different. The weight of responsibility was heavier than ever before. His phone buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. It was a message from Clara. We need to talk. Julian had another episode. Please come. Elon's heart skipped a beat. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed his coat and rushed out the door, the world outside feeling like a blur as he drove toward Julian's home. His mind was racing. What had happened this time? Was Julian slipping further away from reality? Or was there hope that they could still pull him back from the brink? When Elon arrived, Clara and Michael were waiting in the living room, their faces drawn with exhaustion and fear. Julian was upstairs, resting, but neither parent seemed relieved. Mr. Musk, thank you for coming, Clara said, her voice tight with worry. Julian had another episode. It was worse than the last one. He started talking about things we didn't understand, about the future, about things that aren't even possible yet. But the worst part was the look in his eyes. He said he felt the future. Elon's stomach twisted. He had heard that phrase before from Julian, feeling the future. The last time he'd said it, Julian had spoken of understanding energy on a level that was light years ahead of human science. But now, it seemed even more ominous. Did he say what he felt? Elon asked, trying to keep his voice calm. Clara shook her head. He couldn't explain it, but it was clear. It's like he's in a different place. A place we can't reach. Michael spoke up, his voice cracking. I think he's trying to do something that isn't meant to be done yet. His mind is too advanced for his body to keep up. We've tried to talk to him, but it's like he's on a different plane. We don't know how to help him anymore. Elon stood there, the full weight of the situation crashing down on him. Julian was no longer just a child with an extraordinary mind. He had become something else. He was tapping into a realm of knowledge, a future that wasn't meant for him to understand yet, and it was destroying him. Elon, Clara's voice broke through his thoughts. Please help us. We don't know what to do anymore. Julian is in danger. We're losing him. Elon nodded slowly, his mind spinning. He knew what needed to be done. He couldn't let Julian continue this reckless pursuit, but he also couldn't just shut him down. Julian had already shown glimpses of something extraordinary, something that could change everything. I'm going to talk to him, Elon said, determination in his voice. But we need to make sure he understands that he can't push himself any further. Not yet. When Elon entered Julian's room, the boy was lying in bed, eyes closed, breathing shallowly. He didn't look like the same child Elon had met just days ago. He looked fragile, pale, and exhausted. But even in this state, there was a quiet energy about him. It was as if the fire inside him had only been dimmed, not extinguished. Julian opened his eyes when he sensed Elon's presence. The faintest glimmer of recognition appeared in his eyes, though it was quickly replaced by a distant, unfocused look. Elon, Julian whispered, his voice weak but urgent. I can feel it, the future. It's so close. I can almost touch it. Elon walked over and sat by his side, gently taking Julian's hand in his. The boy's skin felt cold, his pulse racing beneath his small fingers. Elon tried to mask the panic rising in his chest as he spoke. Julian, listen to me. You've pushed yourself too hard. You're not ready. Your mind is trying to do things that even the greatest scientists don't fully understand yet. You have to slow down. You have to rest. But Julian shook his head, his face contorting with frustration. I can't stop. If I do, everything we've worked for will be lost. I can see the future, Elon. I know what needs to happen. I can make it happen. Tears welled up in Elon's eyes as he looked at Julian, his heart breaking for the child who had already carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. He had seen genius before. He had even nurtured it. But this was different. This wasn't just brilliance. It was a force of nature, a tidal wave that could crash through everything in its path. Julian, you don't have to carry this alone, Elon said, his voice soft but firm. You don't have to be the one to solve everything right now. There's time. We'll work together, but you have to take care of yourself first. Please. Julian's expression faltered. For a brief moment, it seemed like the boy could hear him, could see the depth of concern in Elon's eyes. But then the flicker of doubt was gone, replaced by the same intense focus he had shown since the first day they met. I can't stop, Julian said, his voice quieter now, almost resigned. I was meant for this. Elon placed his hand on Julian's forehead, feeling the heat radiating off him. Maybe, but you're not meant to burn out. You're not meant to lose yourself in the process. You're meant to be a part of the future, not just a spectator of it. Julian closed his eyes, his body trembling, as though he were fighting something inside. Elon could see the struggle. The boy was caught between two worlds, two realities. One was a future of unimaginable potential. The other was the present, where he was still just a child. And it was that tug of war that was breaking him apart. For the first time, Julian let out a soft, almost imperceptible sob. It was the sound of a child who had realized that the future he dreamed of might not come without cost. Elon squeezed his hand gently, trying to reassure him. We're going to figure this out, Julian. Together. The days that followed Julian's emotional breakdown were some of the most trying Elon had ever experienced. The gravity of the situation had finally hit home for everyone, especially Julian. As the boy lay in bed, recovering from the latest episode, Elon's heart ached. He had always believed in pushing boundaries, in chasing the impossible, but now he had to reconsider his approach. Elon knew he couldn't keep asking Julian to stop, to slow down. The boy's mind was too far ahead of its time, his intellect and drive far beyond what anyone could truly comprehend. Julian was living in a future that Elon could barely imagine. But the price he was paying to access that future was too great. In the days following the breakdown, Elon took a more active role in Julian's care. He met with doctors and specialists from around the world, seeking any solution to protect Julian's health while also giving him the opportunity to reach his full potential. But answers didn't come easily. It became apparent that there were no quick fixes, no magic pill to balance Julian's exceptional mind with his fragile body. The medical team suggested an experimental treatment that could potentially help Julian stabilize his cognitive function without the intense strain on his physical health. It involved a mixture of brain therapy, neural recalibration, and intense rest periods, which would require Julian to disconnect entirely from his work. He would need time to recover, time to heal. It wasn't an easy decision. Julian had resisted every suggestion to take it easy, but now it was clear that without this treatment, his trajectory would only spiral further out of control. Elon had a long conversation with Clara and Michael, explaining the risks and the potential benefits of the treatment. "We have to give him a chance," Clara said, her voice trembling as she held Michael's hand. "He's too special to lose, Elon. But we can't let him burn himself out. Not like this." Elon, ever the visionary, wanted to believe that they could push forward and find a shortcut, a way around the system. But deep down, he knew that Julian needed time. Time to heal. Time to grow. Time to let his body and mind catch up with each other. "I'll make sure he has that time," Elon said, though there was a sense of unease in his voice. "I'll do whatever it takes." A week later, Julian reluctantly agreed to the treatment. Elon had been there by his side every step of the way, working with doctors, arranging the treatment plan, and even bringing in some of his top neuroscientists to ensure the treatment was as cutting-edge as possible. The process wasn't easy, and Julian struggled at first. His mind kept racing, always yearning to explore new ideas, but his body demanded rest. For the first time in a long while, Julian truly rested. He slept soundly, ate regularly, and took the time he needed to recuperate. During this time, Elon took the opportunity to have conversations with Julian that he hadn't been able to have before. Conversations that went beyond scientific theories and into the realm of what it meant to live, to feel, and to understand the world around them. One night, as Julian lay in bed, looking out the window at the stars, he spoke quietly, almost as if to himself. "Mr. Musk, do you think I'll be able to change the world? Do you think I can really make a difference?" Elon sat beside him, the weight of Julian's words pressing against him. The question wasn't just about the future. It was about purpose, about belonging, and about the immense responsibility that came with being a visionary. Elon had asked himself the same question countless times. He had sacrificed relationships, comfort, and even his own well-being to push humanity forward. But at what cost? "I think you already have, Julian," Elon said, his voice calm but sincere. "You've opened my eyes to a future I couldn't even begin to imagine. You've shown me what's possible when we think beyond our limitations. But that doesn't mean you have to do it all at once. The world will wait for you. And when you're ready, it will be waiting for you to lead it." Julian turned his head slightly, looking at Elon with those eyes that seemed to carry the weight of the cosmos. "I don't know if I'm ready, though. I feel like I'm so close, but every time I try, it feels like I lose myself. Like I'm falling into something I can't control." Elon placed a hand on his shoulder, offering what little comfort he could. "It's okay to take your time, Julian. The future isn't going anywhere. You don't have to be perfect right now. You just have to be you. The world needs your brilliance, but it also needs you to be whole. Don't lose yourself in the process. Take it one step at a time." Julian nodded slowly, the tension in his young face softening for the first time in days. "Thank you, Mr. Musk. I think I understand now. I need to rest. I need to grow. I can't do this all by myself." "You're not alone," Elon said, smiling at him. "Not anymore." In the weeks that followed, Julian's condition slowly began to improve. He started to engage in his work again, but this time, it was on his own terms. He wasn't pushing himself to the brink of collapse. He was learning to find balance, something that had eluded him for so long. The treatment worked wonders on his health, stabilizing his brain activity and allowing his body to catch up with his extraordinary intellect. His mind, however, remained as sharp as ever. The difference was that now, he approached his discoveries with a newfound sense of caution, with a realization that there was more to life than just chasing the next big idea. During one of their many late-night conversations, Elon found himself reflecting on the journey they had been on together. "You've shown me something, Julian," Elon said, his voice filled with admiration. "You've taught me that the future isn't something we can force. It's something we have to nurture. It's not about burning out in the pursuit of greatness. It's about learning, growing, and evolving. You've changed the way I see the world." Julian smiled, a glimmer of the boy's old spark returning. "Maybe we all need to learn that, Mr. Musk. Maybe the future isn't something we need to rush toward. Maybe it's something we need to build, together, piece by piece." Elon paused, reflecting on those words. The brilliance Julian had shared with him wasn't just about intellectual breakthroughs. It was about understanding the human condition, about knowing when to push forward and when to take a step back. In that moment, Elon realized that Julian had not only taught him about technology and the future, he had taught him about life. As the months passed, Julian continued to recover, gradually returning to his work with a renewed sense of purpose. He no longer pushed himself to the point of exhaustion. Instead, he took the time to learn, to grow, and to enjoy the process of discovery. His relationship with Elon, once defined by ambition and urgency, was now rooted in mutual respect and understanding. The world had yet to see the full extent of what Julian could achieve, but Elon knew that when the time came, the boy would be ready. And when that time came, the future would indeed be a very different place, one shaped by Julian's unique vision, but also by the wisdom he had gained through his struggles. The months that followed were quieter. Julian, now fully recovered, returned to his studies with a renewed focus and a calmer demeanor. His mind, once a frantic race toward the future, now moved with a careful, deliberate pace. Elon had become more than just a mentor. He was now a companion in Julian's intellectual journey, someone who respected the boy's genius but also understood the necessity of balance. For the first time, Julian began to interact with the world around him in a way that felt more human. Instead of diving headfirst into abstract theories, he took time to understand people, emotions, and the simple wonders of life. He started drawing again, something he hadn't done in years. His drawings, simple but profound, often depicted the stars, galaxies, and structures of the universe, but they also included images of people, families, children, friends, things that once felt distant to him. One night, as they were both sitting at the dinner table, Julian looked up from his plate. There was a thoughtful expression on his face, one that Elon recognized from their first meeting, the look of someone deep in thought, on the edge of discovering something monumental. "Elon," Julian began, his voice calm but filled with purpose. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about the future, about how we build it, not just rush toward it." Elon looked at him, intrigued. "And?" Julian put down his fork and leaned back in his chair, his eyes shining with something new, an eagerness that was tempered with wisdom. "I think I understand now. The future isn't just about technology or science. It's about people. It's about how we treat each other, how we connect with one another. I want to build something that helps people, something that makes life better, not just for a few, but for everyone." Elon couldn't help but smile. The boy who had once spoken only in equations and abstract theories was now speaking of humanity, of connection. It was the kind of realization that Elon himself had come to only after years of personal struggle and growth. "That's a very wise thing to say, Julian," Elon replied, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "And you're right. We can build all the technologies in the world, but if we don't build a better future for people, then what's the point?" Julian nodded, his eyes distant, as though he were seeing something far beyond the walls of the room. "I think we need to focus on bringing people together, Elon. Not just giving them tools, but giving them the ability to communicate, to understand each other. That's what's missing. People don't just need more technology, they need more empathy." Elon sat back in his chair, absorbing Julian's words. The boy's genius was not only in his ability to think beyond the constraints of reality, but also in his understanding of the deeper truths that made us human. Julian had seen, in his short life, what took most of us a lifetime to understand. He was beginning to see the future not as something to conquer, but as something to nurture. a future where human connections were as important as technological advancements. The next few weeks were filled with long conversations between Elon and Julian about the future of technology and humanity. Together, they envisioned a world where advanced technologies were not just tools for efficiency but tools for empathy, where AI could help bridge gaps between people, solve global issues, and bring us closer together, not just as individuals, but as a collective. Julian's insights were nothing short of revolutionary. He spoke of AI systems that could sense emotions, that could communicate complex ideas in ways that resonated on a human level. He dreamt of smart cities where technology didn't just automate life but made it richer, more connected. He even spoke of ways to combat inequality by using technology to give people access to resources, knowledge, and opportunities that had previously been out of reach. But Elon knew that such visions weren't easy to achieve. They required not just groundbreaking technological innovation, but a fundamental shift in the way people thought about the world. And that was going to take time. One afternoon, Julian sat in front of his computer, typing away on a new project he had started. It wasn't a new invention or theory. It was a letter written to people around the world, inviting them to join him in creating a new kind of future. The letter was simple but profound. To the future of us all, I have seen a world that is connected by more than just technology. It is connected by empathy, by understanding, by the shared experiences that make us human. I believe that the future we can create will not just be built on data and machines, but on the shared compassion that makes us who we are. This is an invitation to dream with me, not of a world dominated by technology, but of a world where technology serves us, where it connects us in ways that transcend borders, languages, and beliefs. We can build this together. I believe we can. Join me, Julian. When Elon read the letter, he was moved. It was a call to action, not just for scientists, engineers, and innovators, but for everyone. Julian had done what few ever dared to do. He had shared his vision with the world, and he had done so with the humility and wisdom of someone far beyond his years. "This is incredible," Elon said, sitting down beside Julian. "You're not just talking about changing the future. You're inviting people to be a part of it." Julian smiled, a genuine smile that showed how far he had come from the isolated genius who had once lived only in his mind. "I don't want to change the future on my own, Elon. I want to build it with everyone. We all have a part to play." The next step was clear. Elon and Julian began reaching out to people, scientists, philanthropists, educators, and leaders from all over the world. Julian's letter was the beginning of a global movement, one that sought to create a future not just of progress, but of connection. And it was gaining momentum faster than either of them could have imagined. People from all walks of life responded, some with questions, some with excitement, and others with skepticism. But the most important thing was that they responded. The world was beginning to listen. As the movement grew, Julian's health continued to improve. He was no longer just a boy with an extraordinary mind. He was becoming a leader, a beacon of hope for a world that often seemed fractured and divided. He had learned the greatest lesson of all, that true genius wasn't just about intellect, but about the heart, the ability to inspire others, and the courage to bring people together. Elon stood at the podium during the first global summit, held to discuss Julian's vision. The room was filled with thousands of people, leaders from across industries, young innovators, and ordinary people who had come to learn more about the movement. Julian, standing beside him, looked out over the crowd, his face filled with calm determination. "Elon, I never thought I'd be here, speaking to so many people," Julian said quietly, his voice betraying the smallest hint of nerves. "But I think this is where we start, where we truly begin to build the future." Elon smiled, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You're ready, Julian. You've always been ready. The world needs what you have to offer, and it's time they saw it." As Julian stepped forward to address the crowd, the room fell silent. For the first time, Julian wasn't just a young boy with an incredible mind. He was a visionary, a leader, and a symbol of what humanity could accomplish when it came together. And as he spoke, Elon knew that this was only the beginning. The world had only begun to witness what Julian could do. In the future they were building together, was going to be unlike anything anyone had ever imagined. The global summit was just the beginning. What Julian had started, with his letter and his vision, rapidly became a global conversation. People from every corner of the world, young and old, tech enthusiasts and social activists, educators and entrepreneurs, began to rally around the idea that the future wasn't something to fear or rush toward. It was something to build, together. Elon watched as Julian's influence spread. What started as a small group of curious minds meeting to discuss the future of technology had grown into an international movement. Julian's message was simple yet profound. Technology should not divide us, it should connect us. It should not be a tool of power for a few, but a resource for all. As the movement gained momentum, so did the challenges. While Julian's ideas were radical, they resonated with people. But the powers that be, the established corporations, the governments, and even some of the world's most influential scientists, didn't always share the same enthusiasm. At a private dinner one evening, Elon and Julian discussed the next steps. They were both exhausted from the whirlwind of attention, but they could sense that the tipping point was near. The moment when the world would have to decide. Would they move toward a future of inclusivity and empathy, or would they cling to the old ways of greed, control, and competition? "We have the people," Elon said, swirling the wine in his glass. "We have the momentum, but we're going to need more than just ideas. We're going to need real change, real, tangible action." "How do we make this happen, Julian?" Julian sat across from him, his face serene, yet intense with focus. "I've been thinking about that too. We need to create something tangible, something that shows people what we're working toward, something they can see, touch, and understand." Elon raised an eyebrow. "You want to build something?" "Yes," Julian replied, "but not just another app or piece of technology. I want to build something that fundamentally changes how people interact with the world. A platform that allows everyone to share their knowledge, their experiences, their resources, not just within their communities, but across the globe. It would be a tool for collaboration, for understanding, for empathy." Elon leaned forward, intrigued. "And you think technology can do that?" "I don't think it's just about technology. It's about creating a space where people can share ideas freely, without judgment. A platform where we can solve problems together. A global network that connects the world in ways we've never seen before." The concept was ambitious. It wasn't just another social media platform, nor was it a new communication tool. It was, in Julian's words, a global consciousness. A digital environment where people could come together to solve problems, whether personal, social, or global, through shared knowledge and empathy. The idea was to create a digital ecosystem where AI acted not as a distant machine but as a guide, helping people bridge divides, understand one another, and make decisions based on collaboration, not competition. Julian and Elon spent countless hours planning the logistics of this platform. They envisioned it as an open-source, decentralized system, accessible to anyone with an internet connection. People could post problems, whether they were small community issues or global challenges, and invite others to collaborate on solutions. The AI at the core of the system would connect people with relevant expertise, resources, or ideas, guiding them towards solutions that took into account both the practical and the human aspects of any given issue. But the road to bringing this vision to life was fraught with obstacles. The world wasn't ready for such a radical shift, and the establishment fought back. Big corporations feared the disruption it would cause to their power structures. Governments worried about the implications of such a free, open system. And then there were those who simply didn't believe that a system based on empathy and collaboration could work in a world that had always been driven by competition and profit. Despite the resistance, Julian and Elon pressed forward. They enlisted a team of developers, engineers, and visionaries who shared their ideals. Together, they began building the infrastructure for what would eventually be called Empathus, the first global platform for empathy-driven problem-solving. The project was enormous. They had to develop sophisticated AI algorithms that could understand and process human emotions, a complex task that had never been attempted on such a scale. They needed to create a decentralized network that could operate securely while allowing for the free exchange of ideas. And they had to address the concerns of privacy, data protection, and accessibility. But Julian was determined. With each passing day, he threw himself deeper into the project. He worked tirelessly, his mind constantly racing as he imagined new ways to make Empathys not just a platform, but a movement, a living, breathing part of the world's daily life. Elon was there, too, guiding the financial and strategic decisions, leveraging his experience with SpaceX and Tesla to navigate the complexities of building something this ambitious. After nearly a year of hard work, Empathys was ready for its beta launch. Julian stood in front of a small audience of tech leaders, influencers, and philanthropists at a press event, ready to reveal the platform that would change the world. Elon stood beside him, watching the boy who had come so far from the troubled, isolated genius he had met all those months ago. "This," Julian said, his voice steady, but filled with an unmistakable passion, "is more than just a new kind of technology. It's a new way of thinking, a new way of living. Empathys is a platform where anyone can share their ideas, where AI helps us solve problems not through algorithms alone, but by understanding the human stories behind them. It's a place where people are not just users, they're collaborators, thinkers, and creators. Together, we can build a better world." The crowd was silent for a moment, processing the enormity of what Julian had just said. And then, slowly, the applause began. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was an eruption of genuine excitement. Julian's vision had come to life. As the press event wound down and the crowd dispersed, Elon and Julian stood outside the conference hall, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. The world was changing, and they had just given it the tools to do so. "This is it, Julian," Elon said, his voice a mix of awe and pride. "This is the beginning of something truly extraordinary." Julian smiled, his expression calm but filled with quiet satisfaction. "It's just the beginning, Elon. We have a lot of work ahead of us. But I believe that together, we can build something that changes everything." As they watched the night sky, a sense of hope filled the air. The future, once a distant, abstract concept, was now something tangible, something real. And it was a future that Julian, with Elon's support, was building one connection at a time. The excitement surrounding the launch of Empathys was palpable. Julian and Elon had created something that felt like the dawn of a new era. But even as the world embraced the platform's promise, the true test had only just begun. It was one thing to build a platform that was theoretically capable of connecting people and solving problems. It was another to see if it could actually work in the real world. The initial beta phase of Empathys attracted thousands of users from around the globe. People posted problems big and small: climate change, poverty, mental health, local community issues. Some were complex global challenges, while others were personal struggles shared in hopes of finding support. But there was one thing that united them all: the desire to connect, to share, to help. For the first few weeks, the platform buzzed with energy. AI algorithms, designed to match problems with people who had the knowledge or skills to help, worked seamlessly. People from different cultures, backgrounds, and professions came together, exchanging ideas and resources like never before. Some users found innovative solutions to long-standing issues, while others built lasting friendships and partnerships. But then, something unexpected happened. The platform, which had been designed to promote empathy, began to attract users with more cynical intentions. Some took advantage of the anonymity Empathys provided to manipulate others, spreading misinformation or exploiting the goodwill of the community. A few, disillusioned with the idea of collaboration, began to challenge the very premise of the platform, pushing the limits of its openness and accessibility. One evening, Julian was on a video call with Elon, discussing the progress of Empathys when the subject came up. "We've hit a snag," Julian said, his voice steady, though there was an underlying concern. "There's a growing number of users who are not exactly playing by the rules. They're trolling, exploiting vulnerabilities in the system, and spreading false information. It's not just harmless chatter. It's affecting the trust people have in the platform." Elon leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in thought. "I was expecting this. Any platform that's open and decentralized is going to face this challenge. But we have to address it carefully. We can't compromise the core values of Empathys. If we do, we risk undermining everything we've built." Julian nodded, deep in thought. "I know. The whole point was to create a space where people could speak freely and collaborate without fear. But we can't ignore the bad actors who are manipulating it for their own gain. We need to figure out how to keep the platform safe and supportive without sacrificing the openness that makes it unique. There was a long silence between them as they both pondered the situation. Elon finally broke it with a quiet, thoughtful comment. It's a balance. We need to create boundaries that ensure people's safety and trust, but we can't become so rigid that we stifle the very thing that makes empathy special. We can't let the fear of misuse dictate our choices. We need to find a way to use the system's core, its empathy, to hold people accountable. Julian's eyes lit up with an idea. What if we integrate a system of peer accountability? Not a strict set of rules or bans, but a way for the community to self-regulate. We could use AI to help moderate, but also allow users to flag harmful behavior and vote on how to handle it. The community could decide what's acceptable and what isn't. Elon raised an eyebrow, impressed by the idea. You mean to make the community the enforcers? Exactly, Julian replied. Empathy isn't just a tool for collaboration. It's a community. If we empower people to hold each other accountable, we foster trust. We give users a sense of ownership over the platform and its direction. And that could be the key to ensuring the platform doesn't lose its purpose. Elon smiled. I like it. It keeps the spirit of what we're trying to do intact, while still providing the safeguards we need. The next few weeks were dedicated to refining the platform's moderation system. Julian worked with the development team to implement a voting mechanism that allowed users to flag harmful content and behavior. Rather than a top-down enforcement model, empathy would be governed by the collective responsibility of its users. The AI would provide suggestions and guide the process, but ultimately, it would be the community that decided what was acceptable. It wasn't an easy fix. The development team had to balance transparency with privacy, creating a system that protected users' identities while ensuring that accountability remained in place. There were several moments of doubt as the complexities of such a system began to surface. Would the community be able to moderate itself effectively? Would users abuse the voting system, just as they had abused the platform? Julian remained steadfast. His faith in the people of Empathy and the power of empathy was unwavering. But he also understood that the success of the platform depended on the choices they made now. This was a pivotal moment, one that could either propel Empathy forward or cause it to falter. The revised platform launched to a mixed response. Some users were thrilled by the new self-regulation features, excited by the idea of being active participants in shaping the platform's culture. Others were skeptical, unsure of how effective it would be in preventing the spread of harmful content. As the days went on, something surprising happened. The sense of accountability Julian had hoped for started to take root. The community began to take its role seriously. Users actively flagged harmful content, and discussions about ethics, responsibility, and trust became central to the conversations taking place on the platform. AI algorithms identified patterns of abusive behavior and helped direct the attention of moderators, but it was the users themselves who made the final calls. Slowly but surely, the platform's culture began to shift. More and more users were contributing in positive ways, solving problems, offering help, and learning from each other. The selfishness and manipulation that had initially crept into Empathy were replaced by a shared commitment to making the platform a space of mutual support. But the process was far from perfect. There were still challenges to overcome. Not all users agreed on what constituted harmful content or behavior. Some people still tried to game the system, and certain problems seemed too complex for the platform to handle alone. The path forward was never going to be smooth, but Julian and Elon were beginning to see the early signs of what could be a long-lasting transformation. One evening, as they sat together discussing the results of the first month with the new system in place, Elon turned to Julian with a thoughtful expression. You know, I didn't think it would work this well, he admitted. I thought we'd have to take a more traditional approach. But this is something different. It's like you found a way to turn the very thing people often use to divide themselves, technology, into something that brings them together. Julian looked down at the table, his face thoughtful. It's not perfect, Elon. There's still a lot to fix. But I think we're on the right path. People want to help. They want to connect. They just need the right tools, the right environment to do it. Elon nodded. You're right. And what we've started, this is just the beginning. As they looked out over the city skyline, they could both feel it, a sense of possibility that hadn't been there before. Emphasis was proving to be more than just a platform. It was becoming a movement. And the future, Julian's future, their future, was taking shape in ways they had never imagined. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? As Emphasis continued to grow and attract more users, the sense of excitement around it only intensified. For Julian and Elon, the platform's success was both exhilarating and overwhelming. They had always known that Emphasis had the potential to transform the world, but the scale at which it was expanding, and the challenges that came with it, were beyond anything they had initially envisioned. Yet, amid the growing support from the global community, there were increasing signs of resistance. The platform's disruptive potential had caught the attention of powerful figures, corporations, governments, and even traditional media outlets that felt threatened by Emphasis' rapid ascent. They saw in Julian's vision a challenge to the existing power structures. If this platform truly succeeded in bringing people together in such a profound way, it could drastically shift the balance of power. Emphasis wasn't just changing how people communicated. It was beginning to change the way the world thought about the future itself. One morning, Julian received an urgent call from Elon. His voice was serious, far more than usual. "Julian, we need to talk. There's been a huge pushback from some of the biggest corporations in the world. We're talking about the tech giants, the media conglomerates, the whole establishment. They're not happy about what Emphasis is becoming." Julian sat up straighter, feeling a chill of apprehension. "What are they saying?" "They're accusing us of monopolizing global collaboration, claiming that Emphasis is trying to replace traditional channels of communication and governance. Some are even trying to undermine us by spreading misinformation, framing Emphasis as a dangerous experiment. The media is calling it a global social experiment gone wrong." Julian exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. "I knew it was going to happen eventually. People don't like change, especially when it threatens their control." Elon sighed. "I've been in the business long enough to know that when powerful interests feel threatened, they fight back. And they've got a lot of resources on their side. We've seen targeted campaigns trying to discredit the platform. But the real worry is that they'll take legal action. We need to prepare for that." Julian leaned back, looking out of the window. The world outside seemed unchanged, unaware of the battle that was quietly unfolding in the background. Emphasis had begun as a beacon of hope, a way for the world to move beyond its divisions. But now, it was clear. The world wasn't ready for such an idealistic vision. Not yet. In the weeks that followed, the pushback escalated. Major corporations, especially those involved in social media, began launching competing platforms that mimicked parts of Emphasis, but with more control, less transparency, and a focus on profitability. They offered collaboration features that seemed to promise the same ideals, but in reality, they were still fundamentally rooted in the principles of division, consumerism, and control. The media also intensified its scrutiny of Emphasis, with some outlets calling it a dangerous new cult of global unity. The narrative shifted from celebration of Julian's vision to fear-mongering about the potential consequences of a platform that encouraged free collaboration between the masses. Journalists raised concerns about privacy, data security, and the implications of AI being at the heart of the platform. Yet, most of these criticisms were based on misinformation or a misunderstanding of how Emphasis functioned. Even more troubling were the political attacks. Some governments, especially those in countries with more authoritarian regimes, were growing concerned that Emphasis could inspire uprisings, push for greater freedoms, or expose corruption. These governments began applying pressure on their citizens, warning them against using the platform and labeling it as a tool for Western influence or even global subversion. Julian and Elon found themselves fielding hostile interviews, dodging aggressive legal threats, and trying to maintain the platform's reputation amid a media storm. Julian had expected some resistance, but the level of opposition was far more intense than he had anticipated. "We've made a lot of progress, but it's not enough," Elon said one evening, frustration creeping into his voice. The people who control the flow of information and resources won't just sit back and let us reshape the world without a fight. We need to be prepared for everything. Julian's face was calm, but his mind was racing. Empathy was not just a tool for collaboration, it was an idea that threatened the very foundations of how the world operated. The establishment wasn't just fighting a platform, they were fighting a philosophy. We're not just going to stop because they don't like it, Julian replied quietly. What we're building is too important. In the midst of this growing tension, Julian came up with a bold idea. Empathy could become a global movement, not just a platform. What if the resistance they were facing wasn't a sign that they were wrong, but that they were on the right path? What if they could turn this moment of crisis into a rallying cry for those who believed in the potential of human connection, collaboration, and empathy? Julian's idea was simple. He wanted to organize a global event, a live broadcast that would be simultaneously streamed across multiple platforms, including Empathy. The event would feature key speakers from different fields, scientists, activists, artists, educators, who believed in the ideals that Empathy stood for. The goal was to show the world that this wasn't just about one platform, one idea, or one person. It was about the future of humanity itself. Elon was skeptical at first. A global event? In the middle of all this chaos? It could backfire. But Julian was resolute. We can't just sit back and let them control the narrative. This is our chance to take the message directly to the people. If we're going to change the world, we need the world to see what we're doing. We need to unite the people who believe in this vision. And so, they began preparing for the event. The logistics were enormous. They had to coordinate with hundreds of different speakers, media outlets, and organizations. They also had to work with governments, corporations, and influencers who supported Empathy to ensure that the event reached as many people as possible. It was a risk, no doubt, but Julian and Elon knew that this was their moment to truly make their case to the world. The day of the global event arrived. The stage was set for a virtual summit unlike anything the world had ever seen. Julian stood at the center of the broadcast studio, flanked by the AI team and Elon, his eyes scanning the list of speakers and activists who would join him from all over the world. The event was to last for 24 hours, with speakers alternating throughout the day. When the event began, Julian took the stage. His heart raced, but he felt calm. This was his moment. Not just for Empathy, but for the entire movement. He was about to speak directly to millions of people, and he needed to make them understand. Today, we stand at the crossroads of the future, Julian began, his voice steady but filled with conviction. The world is changing faster than ever before, and the tools we have created, Empathy being one of them, hold the potential to bring us closer, to help us solve the challenges that divide us, and to build a better world. But it's not just about technology, it's about our willingness to work together, to listen, to understand, to empathize. The response was immediate and overwhelming. People from across the globe tuned in, flooding social media with messages of support. The atmosphere was electric, as if a new era was beginning. But the real test would be in the days to come. Julian and Elon knew that this event was just the beginning of a much longer battle. The pushback from the powerful forces would not disappear overnight. But now, they had something powerful on their side. A global community of people who believed in the future they were building together. The aftermath of the global event was a whirlwind. Julian and Elon had hoped that their bold move would galvanize people around the world, but the results exceeded even their expectations. Millions of viewers tuned in, and the global summit became the talk of every major news outlet. Social media was flooded with hashtags like #EmpathyMovement and #TogetherWeBuild. People from all walks of life, activists, students, entrepreneurs, and everyday citizens, came together in a way that no one could have predicted. They were no longer just users of a platform. They were part of a movement, but with success came unforeseen challenges. The global pushback, which had initially been relegated to a few powerful players in media and government, was now a full-scale offensive. Some of the world's largest tech companies, feeling the pressure of their own crumbling monopolies, started to escalate their efforts to discredit Empathy. They didn't just create competing platforms. They began lobbying governments, spreading fear about the potential dangers of an open, decentralized digital ecosystem. There were even more concerted attempts to manipulate the public's perception of Empathy. Allegations that the platform was being used to manipulate elections, sow division, and erode privacy began to surface. These claims, although unsubstantiated, were widely circulated in media channels that were far more established and trusted than Empathy itself. Traditional news outlets, which had once heralded Julian's vision as the next big thing, were now questioning whether his ideals had a dark side. As these attacks ramped up, Julian found himself in increasingly difficult conversations with stakeholders, investors, and even some of the platform's early supporters. The balance between transparency and privacy, between freedom and regulation, seemed more fragile than ever. People who had believed in the mission of Empathy were now starting to question if it was too idealistic, too far-reaching. The world was divided. Late one evening, Julian sat at his desk, eyes bleary from hours of emails, meetings, and interviews. He just finished another call with a major tech investor, one who had been initially enthusiastic about Empathy but now was expressing doubt. "Julian," the investor had said, "I believe in the mission, but you're fighting an uphill battle. The pressure from the establishment is immense, and you can't fight it alone. You might need to make some compromises if you want to keep this thing afloat." Julian wasn't surprised. Empathy had already made waves, but now it felt like the tide was turning against them. The idea of compromising on their principles, that was something Julian couldn't fathom. He closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair, staring out into the night. The city below was quiet, the lights of thousands of homes flickering in the distance. The quiet contrast to the storm swirling around Empathy made him feel isolated. For the first time since starting the project, Julian began to wonder if they had taken on something too big. Was it possible to change the world this way? Could the world be ready for a platform built on collaboration, trust, and empathy, or was it just a fantasy? The sound of a notification interrupted his thoughts. It was a message from Elon. "We need to talk. Meet me at the lab tomorrow. I have an idea that might change everything." The next day, Julian met Elon at their private lab, an innovation hub that had become the epicenter of all Empathy development. The building itself was quiet, almost solemn as they walked through the halls. Julian could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on them both. It wasn't just about Empathy anymore. It was about what came next. What did the future hold? "I've been thinking about what's coming," Elon said, his voice low and serious. "And we can't afford to just be reactive. We've got to take control of the narrative. We need to turn the tables on the opposition." Julian raised an eyebrow. "How do you propose we do that? We're already under fire from every angle. I'm not sure how much more we can take." Elon didn't immediately respond. He turned to a large whiteboard on the wall, his finger tracing out a few words and symbols, as if they held the key to everything. Then he turned back to Julian. "We go on the offensive. We build a new, decentralized ecosystem, one that can't be controlled by anyone. Not governments, not corporations, not even us." Julian stared at him, processing what Elon had just said. "What are you talking about? A new ecosystem? Think about it. We've been so focused on building Empathy as a platform for collaboration. But what if we made it something bigger? Something that doesn't just bring people together, but allows them to create their own communities, their own rules, and their own economies. A true open source, self-sustaining ecosystem. If we give people the tools to build their own futures, no one will be able to shut us down." Julian's heart raced. This was something new, something different. It was a radical shift from their original vision of just connecting people to now empowering them to create entire new systems. It was ambitious, almost to the point of being impossible, but it had the potential to solve everything. If people truly owned their data, their interactions, their economies, if they were given full autonomy, then there would be no way for any central power to control them. "We're talking about creating an entirely new form of governance," Julian said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not just a platform, but a new way of organizing society." Elon nodded. "Exactly. Empathy was just the beginning. What we need now is to give people the tools to rebuild the world on their own terms. And we can't let anyone dictate how they do it." Julian could feel the weight of the decision they were about to make. This was no longer just about creating a social platform. This was about changing the fabric of society itself. It was a gamble, a leap into the unknown. But Julian knew one thing for certain. They had come too far to turn back now. The next few weeks were a blur of intense work, innovation, and planning. Julian and Elon assembled a new team of engineers, cryptographers, economists, and legal experts. They began designing an entirely new system that would operate on a decentralized blockchain, a network that would allow users to create their own microcommunities, establish their own rules, and even exchange resources using a new, open-source cryptocurrency. This new version of Empathy would be more than just a platform. It would be an entirely self-sustaining ecosystem where individuals could build their own virtual cities, form alliances, and create economic models that best suited their needs. It was a digital utopia, one that relied on trust, cooperation, and innovation. And it could not be controlled by anyone. No corporation, no government, no central entity. As the project began to take shape, Julian and Elon knew they were on the brink of something massive. This wasn't just about technology anymore. It was about shifting the power balance in the world. It was about creating a system where people could be in control of their own destinies, free from the constraints of traditional power structures. But even as they began to prepare for this bold new leap, one question hung in the air. Would the world be ready for such a radical change? Could they actually pull it off? Julian didn't have the answers, but he knew one thing for sure. There was no turning back now. As Julian and Elon set their plans in motion, they knew that they were not just embarking on a new chapter for Empathy, they were starting an entirely new movement. A movement that could disrupt the very fabric of society, challenge global power structures, and redefine how humans interact with each other on a fundamental level. It was a risky venture, but the more they discussed it, the more they realized that there was no other option. Empathy had outgrown its original purpose. It was no longer just a platform, but a vision that could reshape the entire world. The first step was to introduce the concept of a decentralized ecosystem to the world. Julian and Elon knew they couldn't just launch the new system without significant preparation. They needed a roadmap, a clear plan to guide the transition. They began consulting with experts in blockchain technology, economic theory, and governance systems. They spent hours debating the finer details. How would the decentralized ecosystem function? How would people interact within these micro-communities? How could they ensure that these new digital cities would be self-sustaining, ethical, and free from exploitation? One key element of the new ecosystem was the creation of a universal digital currency, one that would be open source, transparent, and decentralized. This currency would not only allow people to exchange value within their micro-communities, but it would also be used to fund the creation of new projects and innovations, all based on the collective decisions of the community members themselves. Julian and Elon had always believed in the power of the crowd, and this was their chance to put that belief into practice. The currency has to be more than just a tool for trade, Julian explained one afternoon during a meeting. It has to be a symbol of trust, a way for people to invest in each other's futures, to share in the success of their collective efforts. That's the foundation of everything. Elon nodded. It has to be something that can't be manipulated. A truly democratic currency, where the value is determined by the people who use it, not by any central authority. They worked tirelessly, round the clock, sketching out designs, coding the algorithms, and creating prototypes. The new Empathy platform was going to be completely open source, meaning that anyone could contribute to it and anyone could build on it. The power to create and shape these micro-communities wouldn't rest with Julian and Elon. It would belong to the people. But there was one thing that worried Julian. Even as they began assembling this new world, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were opening a door that might be difficult to close. In a world where control was the currency of power, giving people the freedom to create their own digital ecosystems meant that there would be no controlling what happened once it was unleashed. How could they ensure that it wouldn't descend into chaos? Julian's fears grew even stronger when they started testing the new platform with a small group of trusted users. The idea of creating micro-communities, governed by their own set of rules and values, quickly became a hit. People were eager to join, experiment, and see how they could make the system work for them. Some created virtual cities based on sustainability, others focused on social justice, and a few even built digital utopias centered around education and innovation. The new currency system was thriving in these communities, with people exchanging tokens for services, ideas, and projects. There were discussions about the future of the planet, about how to solve hunger, poverty, and inequality. People were coming together in ways that Julian had always dreamed of. But then, it started to get messy. Within the first few weeks, some communities began to clash. A group focused on radical environmentalism began accusing another of exploiting the system for personal gain, while a digital city dedicated to universal basic income was being flooded by people who believed that its resources should be distributed more freely. Some people, frustrated by a lack of resources or support, began to abandon their communities, while others took the opportunity to exploit loopholes in the system. Julian watched with a sinking feeling as some of the early idealism began to erode. The new currency, while empowering, also created friction between communities. Those who had more resources began to grow wealthier, while others struggled to survive. It was as though the same dynamics that existed in the old world, inequality, power imbalances, greed, were emerging in this new digital frontier. "Maybe we moved too fast," Julian said, his voice tinged with doubt as he spoke to Elon late one night. They were sitting in the lab, surrounded by screens displaying data from the new platform. "We wanted a perfect system, but now it's clear that even in this new world, people can't escape the same issues they faced before." Elon paused, his eyes scanning the data on the screen. "We knew this wasn't going to be easy, Julian. This is a whole new way of thinking. We're not just building a platform, we're building a new form of society. And society is messy. It's always messy." Julian didn't feel reassured. He had always believed in the power of empathy, that it could bridge divides and break down barriers. But now he saw the very cracks in the system that could unravel everything they had worked for. Elon leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "I think we've just hit the next phase. We're going to need to evolve the platform, Julian. We have to focus on designing stronger governance structures within these micro-communities. We need to figure out how to address the inequalities that have emerged. It's not a failure. It's just a new challenge." Julian nodded, but the weight of what Elon was saying hung over him. Empathy was no longer just a tech project. It was an experiment in human nature, in the ideals of collaboration and empathy. And like all experiments, it had the potential to fail. But Julian refused to give up. They had come too far. Over the following weeks, Julian and Elon brought in more experts, sociologists, political theorists, economists, and ethicists, into their think tank. Together, they brainstormed ways to introduce a new form of governance within the digital communities. They realized that the original vision of a decentralized ecosystem needed to be refined. It wasn't enough to simply allow people to create their own systems. They also had to provide tools for conflict resolution, resource distribution, and collective decision-making. The solution was to integrate community councils into each digital city, a decentralized, democratic body that would oversee decisions and ensure the well-being of all members. These councils would be responsible for maintaining fairness, addressing grievances, and ensuring that the community was equitable for all participants. Additionally, the platform would implement a trust-based reputation system, allowing people to rate one another based on their contributions to the community, which would help in determining access to resources and services. It was an imperfect solution, but it was a step in the right direction. Julian knew that no system was flawless, but if they could refine empathy enough to create true equity within the ecosystem, they could offer the world a model for a more just and collaborative future. The next phase of the rebuild would take time. Julian and Elon knew it wouldn't be easy to convince their users to buy into the new changes. There would be resistance. There always was. But as Julian looked at the new plans and read the messages from users who still believed in the mission, he felt a renewed sense of determination. They were on the verge of something revolutionary. The world was watching, and no matter how difficult the journey, they had to push forward. The tipping point had arrived. The new world of empathy was coming into focus, and Julian knew that the future was no longer just a dream. It was being built, piece by piece, by every single person who believed in it. After weeks of intense discussions, long nights, and a few tense moments between Julian and Elon, the first version of the Empathy's Community Councils was launched. The idea was simple, yet profound. Every micro-community on the platform would be able to elect a council of trusted individuals to represent their collective interests, mediate conflicts, and ensure fairness in the distribution of resources. These councils would operate democratically, with members able to vote on key decisions and address issues as they arose. Julian felt a surge of excitement as the first few councils were elected. They were made up of people from all over the world: activists, engineers, teachers, mothers, and even teenagers. The diversity of the councils reflected the very essence of Empathy, a global network that empowered individuals to shape their own futures. But as with any new system, there were growing pains. On the first day of the new governance structure, the system crashed. It wasn't a massive failure, but it was enough to send ripples of frustration through the community. The newly elected council members were overwhelmed by the influx of votes, debates, and requests for mediation. A handful of communities experienced bottlenecks in resource distribution, and a few councils found themselves embroiled in bitter disagreements over how to allocate power within their groups. Some of the early users, those who had been enthusiastic about Empathy, began to voice their disappointment. "We've been promised a utopia," one user posted in the global forum. "But now we're dealing with bureaucracy and slow decisions. This isn't what we signed up for." Julian read through the messages, feeling a deep sense of responsibility. He knew this was part of the process. Empathy was still in its infancy, and nothing this ambitious could be built without struggle. The questions that were now being raised weren't about the technology. They were about human nature. How could they truly create a space where people could thrive, collaborate, and coexist without falling prey to the very same flaws of the systems they had tried to escape? He turned to Elon, who was pacing around the lab, muttering under his breath. "It's not just about making the system work, Julian," Elon said, his voice tight with frustration. "It's about making people believe it can work. The moment they lose faith in the structure, it'll all collapse." Julian rubbed his temples. "I know. I'm not blind to the challenges we're facing, Elon. But we're asking people to shift their mindset, to believe in something fundamentally different. It's not going to be easy." Elon stopped pacing and looked at him, his eyes narrowing. "Then we need to be the ones to show them it's possible. We can't just sit back and watch it unfold. We need to take control of the narrative. We need to demonstrate that it works by leading the way." That night, Julian and Elon launched a series of community bridge challenges designed to engage users in solving some of the most pressing issues facing their communities. The challenges would be collaborative, where different micro-communities could work together to solve problems, whether it was resource shortages, energy solutions, or social issues. The goal was to create real-world, tangible results that people could see and feel. To promote these challenges, they used their most powerful tool, themselves. Julian and Elon decided to host the first challenge personally, inviting the global community to work together with them on an environmental project. The challenge was simple but ambitious. How can we reduce global carbon emissions by 10% in 5 years, using only the resources available in Empathy? The response was overwhelming. Within hours, thousands of users had signed up, eager to participate. Micro-communities began working together, sharing ideas, and proposing creative solutions. Some groups focused on developing clean energy technologies, while others began planning large-scale reforestation projects or designing low-carbon transportation systems. The excitement in the air was palpable. For the first time in a while, Julian felt a glimmer of hope. As the days passed, the ideas coming out of the Empathy community became increasingly innovative. One micro-community, dedicated to sustainable agriculture, developed a new method for farming that could reduce water waste by 40%. Another, a tech-focused group, proposed a revolutionary carbon capture device powered by solar energy. Julian and Elon watched in awe as people came together, not just as individuals, but as part of a collective effort to tackle one of the world's most urgent problems. "This is it, Julian," Elon said, his eyes lighting up as they reviewed the submissions. "This is what we've been waiting for." The moment the community sees the results of their own work, the belief in the system will grow exponentially. Julian felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had always believed in the potential of Empathy, but now he could see it in action. People weren't just consuming content. They were creating, collaborating, and solving problems together. They were no longer passive users. They were active participants in the creation of a new society. The next few weeks saw the Community Bridge Challenge take off in ways Julian couldn't have imagined. The results were posted on the platform for everyone to see, and the ideas that had been generated were not only practical, they were groundbreaking. Empathy was no longer just a place to connect. It was a place to change the world. But even with this success, Julian knew they were far from finished. The challenges of governance, resource allocation, and societal organization were still looming. They had taken the first step, but the real work was just beginning. One afternoon, as Julian and Elon were discussing the progress of the environmental project, they were interrupted by a message. It was from a user, one who had been a part of the original Empathist community and had since become a vocal critic. Julian, the message read, "I've been following the new developments with the Community Bridge Challenges, and I'm impressed. But let's be honest, this is only the beginning. You've shown the world that empathists can work in theory, but how will you handle the next wave of problems? The tech is one thing, but people's behavior is another. You're asking them to trust a system that has never truly existed before. They want to believe, but they need more than just idealism. They need to see results. They need to see that the system can be trusted to work when things get tough." Julian stared at the message for a long moment, the weight of the words sinking in. The road ahead was still fraught with uncertainty. There were no guarantees. The trust of the people, already fragile, was something that had to be earned day by day. And while the empathist community was beginning to show signs of progress, there were no shortcuts to building the trust that could carry them through the storm. That evening, as Julian walked through the city streets, reflecting on the message, a new realization hit him. Empathy wasn't just about technology or governance. It was about creating the foundation for something bigger, a global community based on trust, collaboration, and shared values. But to make it truly work, they needed to keep building that bridge. Not just with technology or systems, but with the people themselves. This wasn't just an experiment in digital innovation. This was an experiment in human connection. The success of the Community Bridge Challenges marked a turning point for Empathy. For the first time, Julian felt a sense of optimism. The platform, once just an abstract concept, had become a real force for change. People were genuinely collaborating, solving problems, and creating something tangible. Yet, in the midst of this growth, Julian couldn't escape a growing unease that had started to settle in the back of his mind. It wasn't about the technology anymore. It wasn't about the governance structure or the innovative solutions that were pouring in from users around the globe. The issue was deeper, more subtle. It was about trust. In every meeting, every conversation, Julian found himself returning to the same question. How do we maintain trust when we're asking people to do something that has never been done before? Despite the successes, the reality was that the core of Empathy, its decentralized governance and global collaboration, required people to place an immense amount of trust in each other. Trust that their neighbors wouldn't exploit the system. Trust that their elected community leaders would act in the best interest of the collective. Trust that the digital currency would hold value. For Julian, this was where things could go wrong. Trust, once broken, could destroy everything. One afternoon, Julian sat down with Lena, one of the original members of the Empathy Advisory Board, and a strong advocate for the platform's ethical vision. They were in a small conference room, facing each other across a sleek glass table. The mood was serious, and Lena's face was pensive. "I've been following the response to the new council system," Lena began, leaning forward. "There's been a lot of enthusiasm, but there's also an undercurrent of skepticism. Some people are starting to question whether we've really thought through the complexities of governance. The tech is great, Julian, but it's the people we're dealing with now." Julian sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know. I've been thinking the same thing. Empathy was designed to be a space for innovation and collaboration, but the reality is that people, no matter how well-intentioned, will eventually clash. It's inevitable." Lena nodded. "Exactly. And even with the councils, the new currency, the governance structures, we're still asking people to trust something that, on some level, feels too good to be true. People don't just trust systems, they trust the people running those systems. And right now, we're the ones they're looking to. Elon, you, me. We're the ones who need to prove that we can handle this responsibility." The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. Julian had always believed in the potential of Emphasis, but now he felt the enormity of what they had built and what was still at stake. Julian's thoughts kept turning over the question of trust in the days that followed. He couldn't ignore the reality that, no matter how well-designed Emphasis was, its success depended on the willingness of people to believe in it. The platform needed to be transparent, but it also needed to be credible. The trust paradox was simple yet profound. How could they build a system that demanded trust when the very act of trusting the system itself was a gamble? That evening, Julian went to Elon's office to talk things through. Elon was hunched over a whiteboard, scribbling equations and diagrams with rapid strokes. The energy in the room was electric, but Julian could sense the exhaustion beneath Elon's usual bravado. "You look like you've been at this for hours," Julian remarked, leaning against the door frame. Elon barely looked up. "I've been working on an algorithm for the next phase of the platform's decentralized voting system. If we want people to trust the governance, we need to make sure the system is 100% transparent. We also need to prove that it's secure, that it can't be manipulated." "I agree," Julian said, "but there's something bigger than that. Even if the system works flawlessly, even if it's completely transparent, people still need to trust it. They need to believe it's fair, that it's not just another tool for someone to manipulate." Elon paused, looking up at Julian. "Trust. You're right. But how do you prove trust in a world where every system has been broken, where every institution has been corrupted?" Julian thought for a moment. "I don't think we can prove trust. Not in the way we want. But I think we can earn it. Slowly, over time, through action. We've got to show people that we are trustworthy." Elon's eyes narrowed. "And how do we do that?" The next few weeks saw Emphasis enter its most challenging phase yet. As more people flocked to the platform and joined the new decentralized micro-communities, the number of governance challenges grew. Some councils struggled to make decisions, while others faced accusations of bias, corruption, and favoritism. The digital currency, though still thriving, was beginning to show signs of inflation as wealthier users gained disproportionate influence. One day, Julian received an alarming report. A group of users had attempted to manipulate the voting system in their community, using coordinated efforts to gain control of key resources. The attempt had been unsuccessful, but it sent a shockwave through the system. If the Emphasis platform was to survive, it needed to address these security concerns quickly and decisively. Julian and Elon convened an emergency meeting with the core team. They decided to implement a trust-based reputation system that would be integrated into the councils and voting systems. This reputation system would be based not just on contributions, but also on integrity. A user's actions and behavior would determine their standing in the community. The system was simple in theory. Each user would be rated on a scale of 1 to 10 based on their interactions within the platform. For example, if someone contributed a great deal to solving an environmental issue, they would be rated highly. But if they were caught manipulating votes or trying to exploit the system, their reputation would suffer. Over time, this rating would influence their ability to participate in councils, lead projects, or access resources. But the trust-based reputation system raised questions about fairness. Who would decide what counted as integrity? What if people disagreed on what constituted good behavior? The ambiguity of human judgment, Julian realized, was both the strength and the flaw of the system. A few days after launching the new reputation system, Julian and Elon were watching the data roll in. The community's reaction was mixed. Some people embraced it, seeing it as a necessary step to ensure that Emphasis remained true to its values. Others felt uneasy. Could a reputation system ever truly be objective? Was this just another form of surveillance? The debate was fierce, but it made one thing clear. Emphasis wasn't just a tech project anymore. It was a social experiment. The stakes were higher than ever. Julian and Elon had pushed their vision to its limits, and now they were watching the system grow more complex, more human. The world was waiting to see if the experiment would succeed, or if the flaws in human nature would be too much for even their ambitious vision to overcome. As Julian sat in his office late that night, he reflected on everything they had built and everything still left to do. The trust paradox wasn't going to be solved in a single moment. It would take time, perseverance, and above all, consistency. But Julian was ready. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but he was convinced that if they could hold on to their values and continue to prove their commitment to fairness and integrity, Emphasis might just be the bridge to a new world. The implementation of the trust-based reputation system marked a pivotal moment for Emphasis. In theory, it was a brilliant solution. By giving people an incentive to act with integrity, they could mitigate the risks of manipulation and exploitation. But in practice, the system was more complex than Julian and Elon had anticipated. In the weeks following the launch, the tension within the platform escalated. While many users embraced the new reputation system, viewing it as a much-needed safeguard, others began to question its fairness. What started as a way to encourage responsible behavior quickly evolved into a battleground for influence. There were reports of reputation farming, where users would artificially inflate their scores by gaming the system, forming alliances to boost their ratings. Some users began to form cliques within the micro-communities, where mutual approval ensured high scores, regardless of the actual value they brought to the table. These were communities of sycophants and influencers, not genuine collaborators. One morning, Julian sat at his desk, scrolling through the platform's reports, when he noticed a troubling trend. Several councils had begun to collapse under the weight of infighting. Accusations of bias and favoritism were becoming rampant, as users who had gained high ratings were now using their power to control decision-making processes. The most alarming case involved a group in Ecoville, a community built around sustainable farming practices. A small faction within the council had used their high ratings to dominate the vote on resource allocation, pushing out key voices who had contributed significantly to the community's environmental projects. The result? A skewed distribution of resources, with the majority going to those who had already gained the highest reputation scores, while others, including the most innovative members, were left with little. When Julian read through the threads in the Emphasis forums, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of unease. The trust paradox had revealed its darker side. Rather than fostering cooperation, the reputation system had become another form of power, one that divided rather than united. And the irony was not lost on him. They had built a platform to escape the failings of traditional systems, but now Emphasis was mirroring the very flaws they had sought to avoid. Julian decided to call an emergency meeting with Elon and the advisory board. The room was heavy with anticipation as Julian presented the data. He could see the concern in Elon's eyes, a flicker of realization dawning on his face. "This isn't what we intended," Julian said, frustration seeping into his voice. "Instead of bringing people together, we've just created a new hierarchy. The rich and powerful are taking advantage of the system we built to help the powerless." Elon sat silently for a moment, tapping a pen against the table. "We knew this was a possibility. Every system, no matter how well designed, has vulnerabilities. The question is, what do we do next?" "I think we have two options," Julian said, his mind racing. "We could double down on the reputation system, enforce stricter controls, maybe even introduce AI moderation to detect reputation farming. But that would just put more oversight into the hands of the platform, essentially creating a new layer of bureaucracy. Or we could make a bold move." Elon raised an eyebrow. "Bold move?" "We reset the reputation system. Start over. Clean slate. We acknowledge that we've learned from this and admit that the system isn't perfect. It's not about perfection, it's about progress. The idea of reputation is good, but we need to keep it human. We need to find a way to focus on collaboration, not competition." The idea of a full reset wasn't an easy sell, especially to the advisory board, who were deeply invested in the reputation system. But Julian and Elon were determined. They spent days drafting a new approach, one that would take the best elements of the original system, reputation, collaboration, and transparency, while eliminating the unintended consequences of power struggles. The solution they came up with was revolutionary. Reputation 2.0, a hybrid system that combined collective accountability with a more decentralized, less rigid approach. Instead of individual scores that could be gamed or manipulated, users would earn credits for their contributions to the platform, but those credits would be allocated collectively by the community based on their shared values. The twist was that these credits wouldn't be transferable or tradable. They couldn't be hoarded or used to leverage power in the same way the old reputation scores had been. The goal was to make Empathis a place where people could work together, free from the constraints of a rigid hierarchy. To implement this new system, they decided to launch a community-wide vote, giving users the power to decide whether they wanted to reset the reputation system entirely. The move would require transparency. Every decision, every vote, would be visible to all. The announcement went live, and the response was overwhelming. Some users were relieved. They had felt the cracks in the system, and they welcomed the chance to change course. Others, especially those who had benefited from the reputation system, voiced their opposition, fearing a loss of power. The debate raged for days. In the final hours before the vote closed, Julian and Elon anxiously watched the results. The vote was close, but in the end, the community had spoken. 57% of users voted in favor of resetting the reputation system. The decision was made. Empathis would be reborn. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Julian, Elon, and the team worked tirelessly to implement the changes, rolling out Reputation 2.0 with an entirely new approach to governance. The process was not without its difficulties. Some councils resisted the changes, and the platform's forums were flooded with debates. But the majority of the community rallied around the new vision. The beauty of Reputation 2.0 was that it was dynamic. Rather than fixed scores, Reputation was now fluid, constantly evolving as users interacted with the platform. The system could adapt to changing needs, shifting priorities, and growing communities. And, most importantly, it allowed users to be judged not by what they had accumulated, but by what they had contributed in the present moment. One evening, as the changes were finally rolled out, Julian stood outside on the balcony of the Empathis headquarters, overlooking the city skyline. The weight of the past few weeks felt both heavy and freeing. They had reset the system, but more importantly, they had reset their own expectations. For all the innovation they had put into Empathis, Julian realized it was never going to be about perfection. The platform would never be flawless. The road ahead would always be filled with new challenges, new questions. But that was the beauty of it. In a world that demanded certainty, Empathis was built to thrive on change. As Julian stood there, watching the sun set over the horizon, he felt a new sense of clarity. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy. It would require continuous learning, humility, and, above all, trust. Trust that the community, in all its messy, beautiful imperfection, would continue to evolve. But for the first time in a long while, Julian felt confident. Empathis wasn't a product. It was a living organism, shaped by the people it served. And as long as they kept moving forward together, they might just create something the world had never seen before. A true global community. The reset of the reputation system was a watershed moment for Empathis. It was a bold decision, and while there were certainly critics, the majority of the community embraced the changes. Over the next few weeks, as Reputation 2.0 took shape, Julian noticed something remarkable. The tone of conversations across the platform began to shift. People were talking less about status, less about power, and more about how they could genuinely help each other. In the early days of the reset, there was a palpable sense of uncertainty. Users had grown accustomed to the old system, where their reputation scores were a clear indicator of their influence. The idea of credits that could not be traded or hoarded, which were based on collective assessment rather than individual accumulation, was still foreign to many. However, as the first Empathis councils began to experiment with the new structure, an unexpected thing happened. Real collaboration. Councils that were once at odds over resource distribution began to find common ground, pooling their credits to fund projects that benefited the whole community. Those who had previously felt marginalized were now able to speak up with a new sense of legitimacy, knowing that their input would count, not because of their reputation score, but because it added value to the group. Julian watched from the sidelines as the changes took root. He couldn't deny the feeling that something bigger than just a platform was happening. There was a sense of unity that had been absent before, a deeper connection between people, not based on artificial measures of value, but on something more fundamental. One evening, after a long day of monitoring the updates, Julian sat in his office, staring at his computer screen. The data looked promising. User engagement was up, collaboration was increasing, and the number of community-led initiatives had skyrocketed. But something in him nagged at him. He had always believed in the power of Empathis, But the reality of what they were building was starting to feel more like an experiment, and experiments, Julian knew, often came with unexpected consequences. What if this new system, while built with the best of intentions, became just another tool for power and manipulation, only this time in a different form? What if empathy, in its pursuit of egalitarianism, was just another stage in the endless cycle of human ambition? Elon called Julian late that night. Julian wasn't sure whether it was the late hour or the intensity of the conversation they had been having over the past few weeks, but Elon's voice sounded different, more intense, like he was on the edge of something. "I've been thinking about what you said," Elon said, his voice low, "about human ambition. The platform is taking shape, Julian. It's becoming something bigger than we expected, and I'm starting to realize this isn't just about tech anymore. It's about human nature. What happens when you give people power, real power, without a defined structure? Does it empower them, or does it make them want more?" Julian paused, feeling a knot tighten in his stomach. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Elon said slowly, "we've built empathy to break the old systems. We've given people a new kind of freedom. Freedom to act, to collaborate, to create. But freedom, Julian, is a dangerous thing when people don't know how to handle it. It's like giving someone a powerful tool without teaching them how to use it responsibly. And even when we think we've created a system of fairness, there's always the potential for it to be twisted." Julian leaned back in his chair, gazing out the window at the quiet city below. The moonlight filtered through the glass, casting long shadows across the room. Elon was right. They had created something powerful, but with great power came great responsibility. The next day, Julian called a meeting with Lena and the core team. The mood in the room was one of cautious optimism, but the concern was palpable. Despite the success of Reputation 2.0, a question kept lingering. Had they created something sustainable, or had they opened the door to something darker? "We've seen a lot of good come out of this new system," Julian began, addressing the room. "But I want to be honest with everyone. There's a part of me that worries we've overlooked something crucial." Lena raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" "I'm not sure yet," Julian admitted, rubbing his eyes. "But I think we need to dig deeper. Empathy isn't just about technology or governance. It's about people. We can't build a better world if we don't understand how people are going to respond to this freedom we've given them." Elon, who had been quiet until then, spoke up. "I've been thinking the same thing. There's a psychological aspect to all of this. The power dynamics may have shifted, but they haven't disappeared. We need to make sure we're not just creating a new set of rules for the same old game." Julian nodded. "Exactly. The platform is a mirror. It reflects the best and worst of human nature. But what happens when the worst comes out?" The conversation quickly shifted from concerns about the reputation system to a deeper philosophical exploration. How could they build a system that balanced individual freedom with collective responsibility? They were grappling with the realization that, no matter how advanced the technology, they were still dealing with human beings, fallible, emotional, and driven by their own desires and fears. One suggestion that emerged was to introduce a mindfulness component into the platform's design. Instead of just focusing on functionality and governance, they would integrate mechanisms for self-reflection and emotional intelligence. Users would be encouraged not just to contribute ideas, but to reflect on how their actions impacted the community. What was their true motivation? Were they acting out of a desire for power or out of a genuine desire to help others? To test this concept, the team decided to launch a mindfulness initiative within the platform. This would be a voluntary program designed to help users engage in deeper self-reflection and emotional awareness. The initiative would feature short, interactive modules on empathy, ethics, and emotional intelligence, as well as meditation exercises and guided journaling prompts. The goal was to make users more mindful of their actions and aware of their own biases. The hope was that, by creating a space for emotional awareness, users would be more likely to approach their interactions with others from a place of compassion, rather than competition. The mindfulness initiative was met with mixed reviews. Some users embraced it, finding the exercises helpful and grounding, while others dismissed it as irrelevant. But Julian saw something in the early data that gave him hope. The users who engaged with the mindfulness modules were reporting a greater sense of connection with their communities In the councils where members had participated in the program were seeing more cooperation and less infighting. It was a small step, but it was a step in the right direction. As the days passed, Julian found himself returning to the same question that had haunted him for weeks. What if the very thing they had created, the freedom, the openness, was what could destroy them? He wasn't sure yet. But one thing was clear. The future of Emphasis wouldn't just be about creating a new form of governance or a new currency. It would be about human growth, helping people evolve into their best selves, and ensuring that they understood the responsibility that came with the power they wielded. As the sun set that evening, Julian stood by the window, looking out over the city again. The moon had risen higher, casting a soft glow on everything below. He didn't have all the answers, but perhaps the real question was not about what the platform could become, but what the people who used it could become. And that, more than any system or structure, was what would define the future of Emphasis. The Mindfulness Initiative was still in its early stages, but Julian could already see subtle shifts in the atmosphere of Emphasis. The initial skepticism was beginning to fade as more users engaged with the mindfulness exercises. While not everyone embraced the program, those who did seemed to experience a deeper connection with the platform and with each other. Julian and Elon had hoped that by encouraging self-reflection, they would not only foster individual growth but also strengthen the platform's communities. The early results were promising. Councils that had previously been plagued by bickering and resource hoarding were now reporting more harmonious collaboration. Users who had been disillusioned with Emphasis were beginning to return, some even sharing how the mindfulness exercises had helped them overcome personal struggles. But Julian knew better than to get complacent. Emphasis was still in its infancy, and he could sense that the platform was on the cusp of something much larger and potentially far more complex than they had ever imagined. One afternoon, as Julian reviewed the latest data, he received a message from Lena that made his heart skip a beat. "We need to talk. There's been an issue." Julian's stomach churned. Over the past few months, they had worked hard to create a safe space for users, and yet here it was again, an unexpected consequence of the very system they had worked so hard to build. He immediately scheduled a video call with Lena. When Lena appeared on screen, her expression was grim. "We've discovered something disturbing," she said. "A new user group has formed, and they're actively trying to exploit the Mindfulness Initiative." Julian furrowed his brow. "What do you mean? How?" "They've figured out how to manipulate the system. They're posting fake mindfulness success stories, pretending to engage with the program, but their goal is to create a false sense of unity. They're manipulating the platform's reputation tracking system, using it to gain influence in certain councils and push their own agendas. The worst part is that the Mindfulness Initiative is now being used as a cover for their schemes." Julian's heart sank. The very thing they had built to encourage honesty and self-reflection was now being twisted by opportunists. Lena continued, her voice tight. "This isn't just happening in one or two places, it's spreading. They're using fake success stories and engagement metrics to make themselves look like community leaders, gaining trust and support where it shouldn't be. It's a new kind of manipulation. It's not just about gaming the reputation system anymore. It's about hijacking the values the platform was built on." Julian's mind raced. The reputation system, the mindfulness program, they had all been designed with the best of intentions. But now, it seemed like those same tools were being turned against them. "What are we going to do about it?" Julian asked, his voice filled with resolve. "I don't have all the answers yet," Lena said, shaking her head. "But we need to act fast. We can't let Emphasis become a breeding ground for manipulation. The trust that we've built with our users is at risk." Julian spent the next few hours poring over the data, trying to track down the users responsible for the exploitation. He combed through community threads, analyzed engagement patterns, and identified certain accounts that seemed to be involved in the orchestrated manipulation. But the more he dug, the more he realized just how difficult it was to detect this kind of subtle exploitation. Unlike reputation farming, which was relatively straightforward to identify, this new method was far more insidious. It was based on emotional manipulation, playing on people's desire for connection and purpose. The realization hit Julian like a bolt of lightning. The more they sought to create an empathetic community, the more vulnerable they became to those who knew how to exploit emotions for power. Later that evening, Julian and Elon met to discuss the issue. They sat in the conference room, the weight of the situation pressing down on them. "This is different from anything we've dealt with before," Julian said, running a hand through his hair. "We can't just put another layer of AI on top of the system. The manipulation is happening at a human level. We need to rethink how we approach this." Elon leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "It's clear we've created something with a tremendous amount of potential, both for good and for bad. But here's the thing. Empathy was never meant to be a perfect system. We've always known that there would be challenges, especially when you involve humans. It's the unintended consequences that are hardest to predict. So what do we do?" Julian asked. "We need to empower the community to fight this," Elon said. "The solution isn't just to fix the system. It's to help users recognize the patterns of manipulation when they see them. We need to turn the tables and make the community part of the solution, not just the victims." The solution they came up with was ambitious. Empathy 3.0, a new iteration of the platform that would integrate more community-driven safeguards. Rather than relying on algorithms to spot manipulative behavior, they would introduce peer-based moderation, a system where users could flag manipulative tactics and deceptive behavior in real time, with a robust community-driven review process. But it wouldn't stop there. Julian and Elon decided to introduce emotional literacy training directly into the platform, taking the mindfulness initiative to the next level. By teaching users to recognize emotional manipulation, the hope was that they would become more aware of when their emotions were being used against them. As Julian sat at his desk, drafting the proposal for Empathy 3.0, he couldn't help but feel the enormity of the task ahead. The platform had grown exponentially, and with that growth came greater complexity. They had created something that was more than just a tool. It was a social ecosystem, with all the inherent messiness that came with human interaction. The challenge, Julian realized, wasn't just about building a better platform. It was about teaching people to use it responsibly, to navigate the complexities of human nature, and to engage with each other in a way that fostered empathy, trust, and growth. The next morning, the team began drafting the first round of updates for Empathy 3.0. The feedback from the community was mixed, with some users excited about the changes and others skeptical of how effective the new safeguards would be. But there was one thing everyone agreed on. The fight against manipulation was far from over. Julian's thoughts lingered on the platform's evolution. What began as a vision for a better world, a place where people could share, learn, and grow, was now a living, breathing entity, constantly evolving and adapting to the complexities of human behavior. As he worked on the next phase of updates, Julian couldn't shake the feeling that Empathy was becoming something far bigger than any of them had imagined. It was a reflection of humanity itself, beautiful, flawed, and capable of incredible things, but also deeply vulnerable. And that vulnerability, Julian knew, would be the greatest challenge of all. As the days turned into weeks, the changes brought by Empathy 3.0 began to take shape. The new peer-based moderation system was met with a mixture of enthusiasm and skepticism. Julian and his team had poured their hearts into designing a platform that would not only prevent manipulation but also empower users to take control of their community. But the more they pushed forward, the more they realized that the battle for a truly just, empathetic society was never going to be simple. In the early days after the launch of the updates, Julian and Lena spent long hours reviewing the platform's new data streams. The peer-based moderation system had done its job. Users were flagging manipulative behavior, and there were a handful of cases where the system had caught deceptive actions before they could spread. But a pattern was starting to emerge. While users were quick to identify manipulative behavior in others, many were reluctant to reflect on their own actions. The mindfulness initiative had taught them to be aware of external manipulation, but it hadn't fully prepared them to face the mirror that reflected their own biases, desires, and contradictions. Julian sat in his office late one evening, staring at the new data. Something felt wrong. There was a growing undercurrent in the platform, a tension he couldn't quite put his finger on. A message flashed across his screen. It was from Elon. "I think we've made a mistake." Julian's heart raced. They had poured so much energy into making Empathy an open, collaborative space for everyone. What could he have missed? The next day, Julian met with Elon at the Empathy headquarters. Elon's usually confident expression was replaced with one of deep concern. "We've been focusing so much on stopping manipulation from the outside," Elon said, pacing the room. "But I'm starting to wonder if we've ignored something far more insidious: our own biases. Every system, no matter how well-intentioned, is shaped by those who create it. And in our efforts to protect users from exploitation, we've overlooked the power we have in shaping how the platform functions." Julian nodded slowly, the weight of Elon's words sinking in. "Are you saying that empathy is still vulnerable to manipulation, but this time, from us?" Elon stopped pacing and looked at Julian, his expression grave. "Exactly. We've created a platform that's supposed to be a mirror, but what happens when the people holding up the mirror don't fully understand the reflections they're showing?" The realization hit Julian like a ton of bricks. They had created a system that encouraged transparency, openness, and collaboration. But in doing so, they had failed to acknowledge their own influence, how their decisions, biases, and values were embedded in the platform itself. As the team dug deeper into the issue, they discovered something unsettling. The peer-based moderation system, while effective in many ways, had also allowed certain groups to gain disproportionate influence. Some users, though well-meaning, had become gatekeepers of empathy, judging others for the way they engaged with the platform, for the way they felt, even when they were acting in good faith. Julian remembered one of the first principles of empathy. People were not just the users of the platform, but the very foundation of it. Every decision made, every algorithm written, and every policy enacted shaped the way people interacted with each other. The more they tried to combat manipulation, the more they realized that they had created an environment where perceptions of power were just as dangerous as the power itself. One evening, Julian logged into the platform to check on the community's feedback. As he browsed through the discussions, he came across a thread that made his blood run cold. It was a post from a longtime user of empathy, someone who had consistently been viewed as a thought leader. She was advocating for the importance of emotional self-regulation, of using the platform to foster personal accountability and growth. But the comments below were troubling. "I tried to follow your advice," one user wrote, "but I feel like I'm being judged for every little mistake I make. I just want to be myself, not a version of myself that's constantly under scrutiny." Another comment echoed the sentiment. "I feel like I'm being forced to perform empathy, like it's not about real connection anymore, but about keeping up appearances. I can't do this." Julian sat back in his chair, his heart heavy. The very system they had designed to foster empathy had created an environment where users felt alienated by the pressure to be perfect. Instead of freeing people to be their true selves, they had inadvertently created a space where they were forced to conform to a new set of expectations. The next morning, Julian gathered his team for an emergency meeting. As he stood before them, he could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on his shoulders. "We've done a lot of good," he began, "but I think we've missed something crucial. We've been so focused on building a perfect system that we forgot one fundamental truth. Imperfection is part of being human. We can't force people to be something they're not. Empathy cannot be a performance." Lena, who had been quiet until then, spoke up. "So what are you proposing?" "We need to rethink the way we've designed the platform," Julian said, his voice firm. "Instead of creating a new standard for empathy, we need to create a system that celebrates diversity, emotional diversity, intellectual diversity, and even moral diversity. We need to acknowledge that people come to empathy not to be perfect, but to grow, to learn, and to be vulnerable." The solution they came up with was simple but profound: Empathy 4.0. He leaned back in his chair, scrolling through the feedback from users. The changes had clearly made an impact. Some users, who had initially been skeptical of the authenticity approach, were now sharing their own emotional struggles in ways they had never done before. The gatekeepers of empathy had been replaced by a new kind of leader, a leader who was not afraid to be vulnerable, who celebrated the power of imperfection. One evening, Julian received an unexpected email from an unlikely source: Eva Tran, the woman who had once been one of the most vocal critics of empathy's original model. Eva had been one of the first to denounce the platform as an illusion of progress, a system that imposed ideals of perfection and fostered unhealthy competition. Her email subject was simple: a new kind of leader. When Julian opened the email, He was surprised by the warmth in Eva's words. "Julian, I never thought I'd be writing this, but I've seen a shift in empathy that I don't think anyone could have predicted, least of all me. What you've built is something that's finally moving beyond the idea of perfection and embracing the realness of people. It's not just a platform anymore. It's a community. And if I'm being honest, I'm a part of it now. I wanted to share something with you that I've learned through this process. The best kind of leadership isn't about telling people what to do or creating systems that force them into a mold. It's about allowing people to grow in their own way and supporting them as they do. I didn't understand that before, but now I do. I'd love to talk to you more about this shift. I think the world needs to hear about it." Eva. Julian's heart lifted as he read the message. He had always believed that empathy was a two-way street, that true leadership came from listening, learning, and adapting. Eva's words reinforced something he had learned over and over during the journey of creating empathy, that the true test of leadership wasn't about creating perfect systems or achieving flawless outcomes. It was about embracing the messy, imperfect process of growth and trusting people to find their own path. The next day, Julian invited Eva for a video call. When she appeared on screen, she looked different. The hard edges that had once defined her seemed to have softened, replaced by an openness and warmth that Julian had never expected. "Hey, Eva," Julian greeted her with a smile. "It's good to see you." "I know this might seem a little unexpected," Eva said, her voice steady but with a hint of vulnerability. "But I've been thinking a lot about the changes in empathy. And I've realized something. I've spent so much time fighting against what I thought was wrong. I never stopped to ask myself what could be right." Julian chuckled softly. "I get that. It's easy to get caught up in the idea of fighting against something without considering what you're actually fighting for." Eva nodded. "Exactly. What empathy is doing, what you're doing, it's not just about creating a space for people to feel good about themselves. It's about allowing people to lead, to be the leaders of their own stories, their own growth. And that's a kind of leadership I can get behind." The conversation turned to the future. Eva expressed her desire to help spread the word about the new direction empathy was taking, particularly to the communities she had been a part of in the past, communities that had been disillusioned with conventional leadership and self-improvement frameworks. Julian was excited by the idea of collaborating with Eva, who had always been a critical voice in the world of social change. Her influence could help bridge the gap between those who still saw empathy as a flawed experiment and those who had embraced its new direction. Over the next few weeks, Eva became a key partner in spreading the message of Empathy 4.0. Together, they worked on a series of public discussions, workshops, and interviews, sharing the philosophy behind the new version of empathy. Julian had always believed that true leadership was about trust and vulnerability, but seeing it in action, hearing it from someone like Eva, was powerful. The more people heard about the new model, the more they seemed to embrace the idea that leadership didn't have to be perfect, it just had to be authentic. One of their first joint projects was a global conversation about empathy and leadership, where people from all walks of life could share their thoughts on what it meant to lead with empathy. The event was streamed live across the platform, drawing thousands of viewers. The conversation ranged from personal stories of growth to larger discussions on how empathy could reshape corporate and political leadership. The event was a resounding success, not because it had all the answers, but because it encouraged open, authentic dialogue. It reflected the very spirit of empathy, a space where everyone could be a leader, not by having all the answers, but by sharing their experiences and learning from one another. Months later, Julian stood in front of a group of new users at a workshop, welcoming them to empathy. His message had shifted from technical specifications and platform features to something deeper. "We've built something here," he said, "but it's not just a platform. It's a place where everyone can lead, where you can lead. Leadership isn't about power. It's about sharing what you've learned, being vulnerable enough to admit when you're wrong, and helping others along the way. Leadership is about being human." Julian had come full circle. What had started as a vision of a perfect, curated world had transformed into something more powerful, an ecosystem where everyone had the opportunity to lead in their own way. It was messy, imperfect, and real. But in its authenticity, it had become the kind of space where people could truly grow. The morning sun cast a golden glow over the headquarters of Empathy. Julian stood by the large windows, looking out at the world beyond. The same world he had once tried to change through systems, algorithms, and control. Now, it was a world he understood much better. One filled with complexity, imperfection, and infinite potential. The journey of Emphasis had not been easy, and at times, Julian had doubted whether they could ever create something truly transformative. But as he looked back at the changes, the growth in the community, and the stories of personal transformation, he realized that the real power of Emphasis was not in its design, but in the people it had empowered. It was in the conversations that were now happening, in the real connections being made, and in the new leaders who had emerged, willing to lead with empathy, vulnerability, and authenticity. It was a moment of reflection, a moment to step back and truly grasp how far they had come. The latest report from the data team was glowing. The platform had grown exponentially, and the feedback was overwhelmingly positive. The community was thriving in ways Julian had never imagined. Users were sharing stories of personal growth, supporting one another, and tackling difficult conversations with compassion. The platform had become a model for how empathy could be integrated into online spaces, reshaping not only individual lives, but also the way businesses, governments, and communities thought about leadership, connection, and personal development. One of the most surprising elements was the ripple effect that had begun to spread beyond the platform itself. Other organizations, inspired by the success of Emphasis, had started adopting the principles of Empathy 4.0. Corporate leaders were reaching out to Julian and his team, asking for guidance on how to create work environments that prioritized emotional intelligence and authenticity. Politicians were beginning to consider how empathy could inform their policies and rhetoric. And perhaps most significantly, schools were starting to implement the platform's principles to teach emotional resilience, conflict resolution, and leadership to younger generations. But there was one particular message that Julian had received earlier that week that stayed with him. It was from Lena, who had been by his side from the very beginning, helping him to build the framework for Emphasis and guiding the community through its many transitions. The message was short but powerful. It's happening, Julian. The change we dreamed about. We're just getting started. Julian knew that Lena was right. They had only scratched the surface. While Emphasis had grown into something truly remarkable, it was still in its infancy. The vision for a more empathetic, connected world could not be achieved by just one platform or one team. It was a movement, one that would require the contributions of everyone. Every user, every leader, every person willing to lead with empathy, vulnerability, and authenticity. That evening, Julian stood at the front of the Emphasis headquarters for a final reflection on the journey. The room was filled with his closest collaborators, Lena, Eva, and others who had played pivotal roles in the platform's success. They had gathered to celebrate the progress they had made and to look ahead at the future. None of this would have been possible without each of you, Julian said, his voice filled with gratitude. You were the ones who kept pushing, kept believing in the vision, even when things seemed impossible. Together, we've created something that's bigger than any of us. But this is just the beginning. As he spoke, Julian couldn't help but think back to the early days when they had first begun building Emphasis. They had been so focused on designing a system that would protect people from manipulation that they had overlooked the deeper truth. Empathy is not something to be engineered or perfected. It is something that grows, organically, through connection, trust, and shared experience. They had built a platform, yes, but more importantly, they had created a community, a living, breathing entity of people committed to mutual understanding, growth, and support. The biggest surprise, however, came not from the success of the platform, but from a chance encounter with someone Julian had never expected to hear from. It was Max, the brilliant 5-year-old boy whose mind had once sparked the conversation that changed the trajectory of Emphasis. Max had grown older, now 7, but his intelligence, emotional insight, and understanding of the world had only deepened. "Hey, Julian," Max said through a video call, his face lighting up with a playful grin. "I think you've done it. You created the thing you promised. You built the platform where people can finally be themselves and help each other grow. That's amazing." Julian was taken aback. He had never expected to hear from Max again, let alone in this moment of reflection. "Max," Julian said, his voice thick with emotion, "you've been with me from the very beginning. You were the spark that ignited this whole thing. And now, look at what's happened. Look at how far we've come. Max smiled, the same innocent wisdom in his eyes. You didn't just build a platform, Julian. You built a movement. That's the real power. You helped people connect, really connect, with each other and with themselves. That's more than just technology. That's change. In that moment, Julian understood something profound. Max had been right all along. It wasn't the platform, the algorithms, or even the systems they had created that made Empathy successful. It was the people. It was the change that had rippled outward, beyond the confines of the digital world, into the real world, where empathy had the power to shape businesses, governments, and communities. It was the way the platform had amplified what was already inside people, their capacity for kindness, for growth, and for authentic leadership. As Julian looked back on everything, on the trials, the setbacks, the breakthroughs, and the moments of doubt, he realized that Empathy had never been about creating perfection. It had been about creating a space where people could be themselves, authentically, without fear, and with the support of others who understood that growth is a journey, not a destination. And so, as the sun set on the horizon outside the windows of Empathy's headquarters, Julian couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The journey wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for the first time, he truly understood what it meant to lead, to trust, to grow, to connect, and above all, to empower others to do the same. The world was changing, and Julian knew that, together, they could continue to shape that change. One person, one conversation, one connection at a time. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?